of this year's TTIGF is very well thought through and timely. It addresses the big questions of how to cope in difficult times. It addresses economic, cultural, and social issues. Cybersecurity is a matter of concern, and digital education and digital entrepreneurship have come to the fore as important issues. One of the key issues, however, remains the multi-stakeholder approach. Let me take a step back and look at the beginning of the internet and the origins of the multi-stakeholder approach. The internet, as we all know, was developed as a government-funded technology in the US, but the US government took a hands-off approach. The idea then was that the scientists knew best how to drive the development of the technology. The internet, to begin with, was confined to a circle of insiders, mainly scientists and academics. It took off in the 1990s with the deployment of the World Wide Web. The 90s was a time of hope. It was marked by the end of the Cold War and the triumph of liberal democracies and market economies. The Washington Consensus dominated the economic debate based on the belief in the benefits of globalization, free trade, and market forces. The End of History, the title of the famous book by Francis Fukuyama, summed up the prevailing mood. The internet community saw a new utopia emerging. Two famous statements are typical for the cyber-libertarian philosophy. We reject kings, presidents, and voting. We believe in rough consensus and running code. That was David Clarke, who in 1992 summed up the approach of the engineers in the Internet Engineering Task Force. Or a few years later, in 1996, John Perry Barlow issued a declaration of the independence of cyberspace, and I quote, "Governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace, the new home of mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome among us. You have no sovereignty where we gather." That may sound somewhat naive looking back from today, and governments did not disappear. But however, in those days, to a large extent, they shared the hands-off approach of the United States. 1998 was a key year. In 1998, the OECD and the World Trade Organization held ministerial conferences. They both made a conscious decision not to regulate e-commerce. The feeling then was that it would be important to let the technology evolve, and early regulation might stifle its development. Also in 1998, the US government set up ICANN to administer the domain name system. Again, the feeling was that this important activity should not be government-led. It was supposed to be private sector-led instead. However, there was a counter-trend. Still in 1998, the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, held a plenipotentiary meeting that called for holding a World Summit on the Information Society. In other words, to bring in the information society and the new technologies into the sphere of governments. The World Summit on the Information Society, or WSIS as it's known by its acronym, in 2003 and 2005, confirmed that existing arrangements have worked well, but also said that there was room for improvement. Enhanced cooperation was the code word for this. Most importantly, however, WSIS validated the multi-stakeholder approach and created the IGF. While governments through the UN confirmed the multi-stakeholder approach, they no longer share the optimism of the 1990s. 2001, 9/11 marked the end of that optimism. In 2008, the financial crisis led to heavy government interventions in financial markets and systems. The notion of too big to fail came up and justified the saving of private actors. And then brings us to the Trump administration, which marked an end of the Washington Consensus and the belief in the benefits of globalization and free trade. Also, regulation of the internet was no longer taboo. The European Union imposed the GDPR, the General Directive for Data Privacy, and also there were increased calls for regulation. Microsoft in 2017 called for a Geneva Digital Convention. That was a real paradigm shift. Until then, the private sector's mantra was, we know best how to deal with the problems. Now, a major economic player called for government intervention. Also, there is increased pressure on big tech. We noticed the recent developments on Facebook and Twitter, and there's also forecast that with the new Biden administration, the pressure on big tech will increase from the US government. And finally, this brings me back to our current pandemic. COVID-19, again, governments have shown their power and their relevance. They imposed sometimes drastic measures to protect their population with stringent restrictions on personal freedoms. While we have to accept the authority and responsibility of governments, it is also important to defend the multi-stakeholder approach. And here I welcome very much that you have this as a first agenda item on your program. Only decisions that have been developed in a multi-stakeholder dialogue will be sustainable in the long run. In this spirit, I wish you a successful multi-stakeholder dialogue and thank you for your attention. And I would be happy to answer any questions you may have and to engage in a dialogue. Thank you.
Good morning to everyone at the Trinidad and Tobago National IGF for 2021. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be part of such a distinguished opening panel. This year is starting with more uncertainty about the spread of the virus, about access to vaccines, and about the longer-term economic and social impact. We were not hoping to start the year in this way, but this is how it is, and we will and can respond. There's also certainty in some respects, and we know that being able to communicate over digital networks is vital, that it's locally, regionally, and globally the way in which the world is responding to this crisis. And then this in turn highlights the importance of access to the internet, of skills to use it effectively, of collaboration in digital development, entrepreneurship, and innovation, and of security. In other words, all the topics that you are addressing in the next 2 days. But it also really puts policy, governance, strategy, and regulation front and center. And being able to work together with multiple stakeholders to think about policy, to think about regulation and guidelines, whether they are soft or hard norms, creates a kind of map that we need at a time like this, a map that can guide collaboration between stakeholders, that can guide new investments, that can guide entrepreneurship, and can guide investment in education and implementation of initiatives collaboratively in this area. And if we work together to build this map, it will be a better map. And that is why your national IGF is so significant, the work that you do in the next 2 days, but also what comes out of it and the ongoing collaboration. I think finally, I just also want to urge you to keep in mind the importance of the internet to be an equalizer, that it can bridge gaps between those who have and those who don't. But that will only happen if the strategies and policies that we make and implement consciously take this into account. I know this is of great concern to you, and I look to you to continue this, and through that, to provide a model that others in developing countries and throughout the world can build on. So wishing you very well over the next 2 days. I look forward to your response to the IGF Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group call for issues that we should address at the Global IGF 2021. The deadline for this call is 31 January. Please send in your thoughts collectively or individually. And I really look forward to hearing your voices at the Global Forum in December, be it virtually or in person. Goodbye and have a good National IGF.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, what we would like to do is invite our Honorable Minister of Public Administration and Digital Technologies to aptly say a few words. So, Honorable Minister, over to you.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is both a pleasure and a privilege for me to join you today at this your annual forum. I wish to thank the organizers of this event, the Trinidad and Tobago Multi-Stakeholder Agency Group, for extending an invitation to me to deliver the keynote address. I must admit that I was intrigued by the theme you selected for this forum, digitalization, the new norm, as it is such a fitting theme for the times that we now live in. I'm certain that you will agree with me that when I say that 2020 was definitely an unprecedented year. Not only did we grapple with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic and its negative economic impact on our economy, But as a result of the pandemic, we witnessed an unexpected and exponential increase in the use of digital technology. So much so that suppliers of technology are having challenges keeping up with the demands coming in from all corners of the globe. What we saw during those weeks and months in 2020 was the beginning of a paradigm shift, the onset of the new normal. We witnessed and continue to witness changes in the way people purchase goods and services, communicate, work, and live. Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and Google Meet have become our new classrooms, workspaces, meetup places, and even our landing spots. Digital and online technology has provided the means whereby our local artists and event promoters who have been hit hard by the pandemic are finding ways to host online concerts and even fests as a means of simultaneously generating income and easing the carnival tabanca that so many of our citizens are now experiencing. We have even witnessed election campaigns being conducted online. Who would have thought? The paradigm has indeed shifted, and I dare say there is no going back. The digital revolution, which began a few short years ago, has been intensified by the need for us to adhere to new rules and practices. That is, our health and safety protocols of wearing masks, hand washing, and most significantly, physical distancing. Thankfully, our use of technology has allowed us to evolve and to manage the time that we are currently in. Ladies and gentlemen, the new normal is very much digital and it is here to stay. Working from home and distance learning will endure past the pandemic. The Ministry of Education has indicated that blending learning was on the cards pre-pandemic, as were online exams. The pandemic merely brought this to a head. While the COVID-19 pandemic has had some negative effects on individuals, households, and our economies, on the positive side, it is forcing us to advance the digital agenda and is creating converts of persons who were previously hesitant to venture into that world. I'm truly amazed at the rapid and widespread adoption of technology by micro, small, medium, and large enterprises. As they say, necessity is the mother of invention, and many of our private sector entities were swiftly able to adapt to the new environment. The range of online applications and solutions has grown exponentially to the point where we have difficulty imagining now how we survive without options like Skip the Line, Drop TT, WePay, and Employ TT. I'm particularly proud of Employ TT, which was developed by tertiary level students who participated in a hackathon hosted in 2019 by IGOV-TT. Just imagine the impact on our economy if we seek to harness the technological capabilities of our young people and future entrepreneurs. And having imagined it, we must now set out to achieve it. And GOT, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, has a plan to do just that. Let me reassure everyone that the government has placed the development of a digital Trinidad and Tobago at the forefront of its development agenda. A fully digital Trinidad and Tobago is central to growth and diversification of our economy. As the Minister with responsibility for digital transformation, I am keenly aware of how mammoth and multifaceted a task that is, with the most challenging aspect of it being transforming the way people, especially our public servants, approach their duties. The public service is not known for its agility, and that is exactly what a digital world requires. But this is not just a public service issue. It will require the involvement and engagement of us all, from the doubles vendor who must be prepared to shift to an e-payment system, to granny who will need to embrace e-applications and e-banking. A digital Trinidad and Tobago will only be achieved when ICT becomes a major feature of the fabric of our economy, society, and governance mechanisms. In short, ICT must become as Trinbagonian as Carnival, Roti, and Crab and Dumpling. It must play a fundamental role as both an enabler of national development as well as a sector for economic diversification. In that way, ICT will not only enhance service delivery, improve the ease of doing business, and improve citizen satisfaction, but it will also provide our people with the means to participate in and contribute to the development of our country. Now, there are those among us who will say that this is not attainable given our current economic climate and culture. However, let me assure you that this government is committed to delivering on its promise of a digital Trinidad and Tobago. In keeping with its digital transformation agenda, government has signed an MOU with the government of Estonia for assistance with the development of its e-identity and interoperability platforms. These two initiatives are essential to the widespread delivery of government services online and improvement in the interaction between government agencies. The development of a proper legislative and policy environment is an integral part of our transformation program, and we are in the process of updating relevant legislation such as the Electronic Transactions Act and the Data Protection Act, while we fine-tune our data classification and cloud computing policies. Additionally, government has already introduced measures to ensure that everyone has access to the digital platform, from removing taxes on devices to making devices available to the most vulnerable, to building out access centers and making Wi-Fi available in remote and vulnerable areas. Since last we spoke, the TT Wi-Fi service has been extended to 26 more locations nationwide, inclusive of 15 libraries in both Trinidad and Tobago. It is available in 4 of our major bus terminals, as well as the ferry and water taxi terminals. On the inaugural trip to Tobago last week on the APT James, I was pleasantly surprised at the quality of the connection throughout the voyage. Government has also made some headway in online services, including e-tax, the U-turn system, birth and death certificate applications, travel exemptions, develop TT, which is the construction approval process, to name a few. What we have to quickly advance in support of those and other applications and to make life easier for our citizens is the GovPay system, and we are working assiduously on that. More than ever, our digital transformation program is focused on leveraging digital platforms and information to better serve citizens, residents, visitors, and businesses. However, we need your help. Everyone has a role to play in our digital journey, and organizations such as yours can play a pivotal role in getting us to the end game that we are seeking to arrive at. We need all parties on board if we are to modernize the public service and make Trinidad and Tobago a digital nation. Digital transformation is not the work of one ministry. We all need to work collaboratively to affect meaningful change. As I close, I thank the organizers of the forum for inviting me. I look forward to working with you throughout the year and the coming years to ensure that we swiftly and effectively develop digital Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you and I wish you all the best in your deliberations over the next 2 days.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. One phrase that you made actually resonated very well with me. Everyone has a role to play. And it's not really a situation of pointing fingers, but all of us actually getting involved to actually make this digitalization actually a success, make it a reality. My role here today is as co-moderator for the first panel discussion, that being digitalization, the multi-stakeholder approach. Hot off the press from the Digital 2021, the State of the Internet report, are these statistics. Social media users have grown at the fastest rate in 3 years to 4.2 billion, up 13% year on year. We now spend 42% of our waking time online, with the average internet user clocking up almost 7 hours a day on the web. 5.22 billion people use a mobile phone. 77% of internet users indicate that they buy something online. And older age groups are the fastest growing segments among some of the top social platforms, Facebook, Twitter, etc. What does this have to do with digitalization? The growing use of digital devices has heightened the demand and the need for digitalization. My name is Rabindra Jagannath. I am a director of the TTIGF, Trinidad and Tobago Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group, and I actually have the pleasure in carrying you through the first panel discussion, Digitalization, the Multi-Stakeholder Approach. Co-moderating with me is Sanjay Bahadur Singh. Sanjay is also a director of TTIGF, and our panelists, Peter Davis, Maria Daniels, and Sean Rock, whom I will introduce in a short while. What is digitalization? Digitalization is the use of digital technologies to change a business model and provide new revenue and value producing opportunities. It is a process of moving to a digital business. Digital technology has revolutionized almost every aspect of people's life, as said by the minister, as said by the previous speakers. Office work, shopping, music, movies, television, photography, travel, transport, long distance communication are just some areas that are being transformed. In Trinidad, like many parts of the world, the COVID era has resulted in an acceleration of digitalization. We are forced to use digital technologies for areas such as education, healthcare, commerce. But are we benefiting sufficiently? For example, across the public sector, there are various forms of digital transformation taking place at different stages of progress. Part of the driver for this is that the citizens now expect a level of service akin to what they receive from private companies. Speed, usability, availability, and reliability are key. In the private sector, companies are looking for innovative ways to use technology to improve their processes. The internet, a catalyst or facilitator of digitalization, is open, distributed, interconnected, and transnational. In the internet area, as in other areas, the multi-stakeholder approach is widely accepted as the optimal way to make policy decisions for a globally distributed network. One of the current challenges in taking forward a vision for digitalization of Trinidad and Tobago is understanding where and how to engage with a range of different multi-stakeholder processes and policy-making efforts currently underway. Given the growing importance of the digital economy and the ever-expanding technology landscape, there has been a proliferation of efforts that have the potential to shape policies, governance models, and infrastructure investment priorities. But it is often difficult for many stakeholders in the public and private sectors to identify and focus on these processes with the highest potential for transformative impact. Which brings us to our first panel discussion, digitalization, the multi-stakeholder approach. We have someone on the panel representing the private sector, someone representing the public sector, and someone who can provide a developed country perspective. And in this regard, and largely because I've said too much already, we will just move on to the panel and give each panelist just about 5 minutes, really, to talk to the topic, and thereafter we throw it open for question and answers. First of all, I would actually call on Peter Davis. I have the good fortune of having connections with all of the panelists in some form or fashion. Peter is the principal of Peter Davis and Associates, a management consulting firm specializing in IT governance, security, and audit. And I should say a management consulting firm domiciled in Toronto, Canada. Prior to founding PDA, Mr. Davis' private sector experience included stints with 2 large Canadian banks and a manufacturing company. He was formerly a principal in the Information Systems Audit Practice at Ernst & Young. In the public sector, Mr. Davis was a director of Information Systems Audit in the Office of the Provincial Auditor in Ontario, where he had oversight audit responsibilities for all Ontario Crown corporations, agencies, and boards. A 30-year information technology governance, audit, and security veteran, Mr. Davis' career includes positions as consultant, security administrator, security planner, and information systems auditor. And it's interesting to note that Mr. Davis, despite his long-standing, let's say, foray into information technology and management consulting, is currently pursuing an LLM degree at the University of Toronto, a very ambitious person. So, Peter, let's hear from you some introductory remarks, and then we'll hear from the other speakers, and then we'll throw it out really for questions and from the wider audience. So, Peter, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Danny, and thanks everybody for having me speak. Normally, when I've gone down and done some work in Trinidad, it's never in the winter. Now I get an opportunity in the winter, and I can't go to Trinidad. So, you know, how's that working out for me? I just wanted to bring up some issues to talk about that you people should consider for the next 2 days as you're attending this conference. So let's just set some context. You know, we heard Herr Kumar give us some history around the internet, but think about the genesis of it and how the internet sort of evolved, like the way coral grows. It builds upon itself until it becomes too brittle and breaks off. And so now we're trying to go back and retrofit something to something that's sort of grown organically over time. And that's not always easy. I'm sure you've heard the expression that the only reason God could create the world in 6 days was that there was no installed base. So we're dealing now with installed base that we have to go back and try to retrofit. The other term that we've sort of thrown in here is this concept of multi-stakeholder. So first we have to identify all the stakeholders and then determine what would be their input into this process. So, you know, I don't envision that we all stand around in a circle holding hands and sing Kumbaya. You know, the world just doesn't work that way, but hopefully we can come to some meeting of the minds. Danny mentioned a very good paper from the Internet Society, and if you haven't read the one about the multi-stakeholder, I suggest that you do read it. In there, though, it talks about 3 pillars or 3 components, and I hope that in the next 2 days, and even in this session, that we have an opportunity to talk about the 3 components. There will be somebody probably talking about the cultural part of this, which is very important, and that's really the human aspect, that you have to develop your own talent, and you have to educate the people with respect to digital concepts and how to do digital. But the hardest part is the digital culture, developing the digital culture. And as Wag many years ago said, that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? So, you know, it's not an easy thing to develop that culture. The next thing that I'm reminded of is part of it, and it was emphasized to me this morning, was this concept that you have to build out the infrastructure. And I don't know if the rest of you saw it, but up on my screen, it popped up that the first speaker was suffering from low bandwidth. And so if you want to develop a digital society, then you have to build out the infrastructure. I was shocked the other day to see that the US's implementation of 5G, the rollout that they are proposing, actually has less capacity than our 4G or LTE in Canada. Because I would have thought they were light years ahead of us, because they keep telling us that they're the best country in the world. But at least in this aspect, Canada is outshining the US. The next component that you need to think about is the whole concept of the governance. You need to build that ecosystem to be able to support, you know, the initiatives that we're talking about. And that is not easy to build out that decentralized governance institutions within your country, and then how your country will interact with other countries. So last thing, I think I have a few moments left. The challenges that I see that you need to address in the next 2 days, and we could address it starting with this session, are, first off, we have to look at nationalism. So between your country and my country, we've seen a lot of nationalism going on for the last 4 years. And we saw something in Canada this week we found very disturbing, where the US is engaging in nationalism again, and they're killing off the what's called the Keystone Pipeline. Now, it's not a lot of jobs, but still, it was done unilaterally by the United States and is affecting the economy of Canada. We even see that companies like AWS, Amazon Web Services, is taking the government, the US government, to task because they awarded a contract to Microsoft, which was a very big contract of $10 billion. And the argument is, I'm going to read this, that it was flawed and politically corrupted decision. So if people are making decisions that are politically flawed or incorrect. The next thing that I think you should think about as we go through these 2 days is the 26 words that created the internet. And so in the United States, there's something called the Communications Decency Act, and Section 230 specifies those 26 words. And if you haven't seen the 26 words, then I suggest you look at them and think about what they mean. The next thing I'd like to talk about, or we should talk about, is this concept of net neutrality. Now, Canada has something that we have called the CRTC, which we use to regulate telecommunications in Canada. And in there, it specifically says that we will be net neutral. Whereas the United States talk about it, they beat their chest, but then we see that they're going to do things that are not net neutral. Now, in some ways, I'm sort of on side with them, because I think if somebody wants to spam me, then they should have a lower priority when sending me email than my sister Nancy in Vancouver, right? So I think there should maybe be some sort of tariffs applied. But again, that could affect commerce. We need to think about it. The bigger question, I think, that nobody really wants to address are things like Facebook and the rest of the FANG. I don't know if you know that term, FANG, which is Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google, which everybody seems to be going after these days. Is this concept of some of these a public good? Are they serving a public good? And if they are a public good, then, common law in your country and mine and all the common law countries states that there is this concept of eminent domain, which means that somebody could come along, a government could come along and basically take them over. Another thing we have to consider is censorship. So we're seeing a lot of that, especially around all the trolling and the propaganda and everything that's been going on for the last 4 years. But it's been going on a lot longer than that, because, we even saw that Google put out a paper that I think it was last October, that they did their own analysis and found out that 64% of the people who joined extremist right-wing groups in Facebook were actually recommended to do so by Facebook. So consider that. So somebody's doing something at Facebook, and they're obviously leaning to the right. So Facebook pops up with something and says, oh, you might want to join QAnon. So then somebody joins QAnon, and then when they're on QAnon, it might be, oh, you might want to join Proud Boys. So they're getting sucked into it by the platform itself. So where do we start and where do we end with this concept of censorship? The last thing I just want to briefly talk about is this concept of privacy. So countries around the world need to decide whether we're going to deal with privacy with respect to property laws, or we're going to talk about privacy with respect to liability laws. The Americans have decided that they're going to deal with it with respect to liability. So if your information is breached, your personal information is breached, then you might be able to sue to recover some loss. Whereas a lot of other countries are considering, no, we should be using property rights, like we would use intellectual property. So I own the property, I own my personal data, and I can sell it to you. But if there's again, it's a difficult concept to deal with, and it's not an easy solution, because we go from one extreme where we have no privacy to the other extreme where we have very strict privacy. And if we have no privacy in place, then what happens is people don't tend to offer data. So think about Facebook. If people said, well, I'm not going to post anything to Facebook, then what value does Facebook have? On the other hand, Facebook wants to use that information to sell you information or to provide that information to other people. So somewhere in between there, we're sort of in this Goldilocks and the Three Bears situation, where we just need to find what's right. And again, what's right is what serves the individual as well as the better, the society at large. So I think I've given you some things to think about in the 2 days, and maybe some some thoughts for questions.
Good, Peter, and you have given our panel and itself some things to think about, because when we have questions and answers, certainly during the Q&A session, some of these things will come back up again, and we look forward to you further ventilating on these items. Our second panelist, Maria Daniel. Maria is a partner in the strategy and transaction practice at Ernst & Young, based in the Trinidad office. She has led several high-profile engagements and has provided clients with advice on raising both debt and equity capital, as well as strategic options analysis towards maximizing shareholder value. She specializes in business valuations, transaction support services on both the buy side and sell side of the transaction, mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures, independent business review, receiverships, restructuring, strategic advisory services, including digital transformation and turnaround advisory. Maria is a chartered financial analyst, holds an FCCA designation and a BSc in economics and management from the University of the West Indies. Maria is also a licensed trustee under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act of Trinidad and Tobago, and has worked in several different sectors across the Caribbean, not limited to fintech solutions, strategic advisory services, evaluation services, IFRS 9 implementation, receiverships, and also assurance support. She also works with entrepreneurs to develop business plans and models for new expansion projects. And recently, she has been focusing on developing digital strategies for clients. Maria, can we hear a few introductory remarks from you?
Morning,
Welcome,
everyone. So, change really only occurs when remaining the same is more painful than the change itself. And we've seen that with COVID-19. But when I think about, all the discussions we're having and listening to our initial speakers, we tend to focus on the nitty-gritty when we talk about multi-stakeholder. And everybody has a role, everybody has to play that role. But what is that role all coming together to achieve? So when I talk about digitization and I talk about digital strategy with my clients and I talk about transformation, let us understand that digitization is an enabler. You first have to have a vision. You first have to have, what am I trying to achieve by going digital? I see a lot of people doing digital things. They have an app, they have an online application, but end to end, they are not digital. So I have many people going on my online store, but I haven't changed my supply logistics in order to deliver my products. So when we're talking about multi-stakeholder, and we can look at the macro view, what are we all trying to achieve? What do we see as a digital nation? How is our education going to change? How is the workforce going to change? What are the skills that we really need? Now, unless we have one big vision that we're all working towards, we can have every stakeholder doing something. We get everybody playing their part. But what if their part is not sharing the same vision or the same strategy? Then what we're going to have instead is a multi-stakeholder chaos. So I think what we need to think about when we're talking about multi-stakeholder, we first have to start with, what are we all trying to achieve? Where are we seeing this going? And then who are all the parties that need to play and be accountable, a word that, does not really work in Trinidad sometimes, accountable for your part. So I would like us to really discuss and look at, the broader picture of this is where we want to go. Most of the technology we're talking about today, and I'm sure Peter could attest to this, didn't just exist 1 year ago, right? Everybody, the minister spoke about Estonia. Estonia took this leap 20 years ago, 2 decades. They started to visualize that they wanted to be a digital leader, and they put everything in place to get there. So when we're talking about multi-stakeholder, and I will bring that down even to the corporate organization, your IT people cannot decide we're going digital and there will be success. Your business people have to sit, your customer serving, your supply logistics, your IT, all have to work together towards how are we using digital to differentiate ourselves? How are we using digital to execute our strategy? But we first must understand what is the strategy. So I think when we start speaking about multi-stakeholder, it cannot be multi-stakeholder in your own little silo. So more and more businesses want to see the return on investment from we could buy all the laptops in the world, but if people don't know how to use them, then it's going to be wasted money. We could, when we think about, where this could go and really using digital to maximize value, it can go very far. But each person have to understand what are we trying to achieve. I did computer science. I wouldn't say how long ago, but very long ago. So much so, it was probably in the first 2 years that computer science was actually offered in our schools at an O and A level. And I'm listening to my daughter who is now doing it in Form 5. And it's exactly the same thing I learned 20 years ago. Well, more than 20. But that can't be right. So here we are talking about a digital nation, but our education and our curriculum is not changing for how the world is changing. So I want us to think about not only us, being multi-stakeholder, but multi-stakeholder working towards one vision, one strategy with accountability for each of the levers and responsibility being clearly understood by all parties. Otherwise, we are going to have chaos and we are going to have levers that are not moving together to the bigger whole. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. And I love the panel because, as you said, Danny, we have a wide cross-section here of these multi-stakeholders.
You have a wide cross-section, you're right, and we have a lot to do, basically, to create the framework and foundation for the discussions over the next 2 days. Thank you very much, Maria. Our next panelist is Dr. Sean Rock. Sean is the chairman of IGOV-TT, so certainly qualified to actually talk on this panel. He's a distinguished lecturer at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus in electrical and computer engineering. He has co-authored numerous articles for various publications, including books, engineering journals, such as the Western Journal of Engineering, presentations and workshops at conferences, both regionally and internationally. His career started in teaching mathematics, physics, and being the network administrator at a local college. He subsequently embarked on his academic pursuits that led him to complete his BSc in electrical and computer engineering at UE, graduating at the top of the cohort within the faculty. His keen interest in information and communication technologies led him to read for a master's in communication management with a focus on government policy and management of ICT implementation in the UK, and then a PhD in electrical and computer engineering in the US, focusing on next generation spectrum management for emerging wireless technologies. Throughout his academic pursuits, Dr. Rock has been the recipient of numerous scholarships and awards earned by his exemplary work. He's a member of and has been a reviewer of various publications for the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, IEEE, and he's also a member of IEEE Communications Society, the ACM Association of Computing Machinery, and has been a motivational speaker for the Heroes Foundation. Sean, can we hear a few words from you before we get into the Q&A session?
He's on mute. You're on.
Okay, Sean, you're on mute.
Sean, you need to unmute.
I'm sorry.
Number one
I'm sorry.
sentence.
I'm very sorry. Thanks again, Danny, for that. I thought it was unmuted, but there's a delay in the software on my very aged platform. But never mind that. Thanks again for the invitation and the opportunity to speak. I listened very well to all the contributions that everybody has made so far on this panel, as well as in the welcome address and the address by the minister. And I have to say that first, I wholeheartedly agree with everything that has been said. So I'm going to keep what I have to say particularly short and focus on a niche area and only sort of be devil's advocate in a sense, based on some of the things that have been said. Not that I agree or disagree, but just for the sake of discussion. So I listened to one thing that was said by the Honorable Minister, and she said, we need everybody, we need you all. And I think that is one of the basic tenets of the multi-stakeholder approach. It has to be about having a seat at the table. But I want to balance that with pragmatism, as was already said by the esteemed other colleagues on the panel. Because in order for something to succeed sometimes, yes, everybody should have a seat at the table, I agree. There's an issue of equity and fairness that we need to discuss that comes with the definition of the roles, the definition of that shared goal, that definition of what is it that the particular stakeholders are interested in affecting and are affected by for the shared process, the shared destiny that arises, that they are trying to work towards accomplishing a particular goal. And I'd put forward that I'd want to extend the analogy of there's a seat at the dinner table. I'd want to suggest that there's a seat in the kitchen as well, or a place in the kitchen as well, because the dinner table is more about benefiting from the many things that are going on, but having not the opportunity to participate in the joys and the interaction and the community building and so on that goes on in the kitchen to prepare the meal, the hard work and the effort, I can understand why it is that sometimes people often feel marginalized or they question what their role is. And if any of you have ever been in a sort of a family gathering, I like to draw on personal experiences in making the points. If you've ever been in a family gathering, particularly in a cramped kitchen, the coordination and understanding what dish you're doing, what dishes are being made, etc., is very important. So it comes back to the point that the panelists made with respect to defining your roles. Now, in addition to this, sometimes there's a bit of give and take. So you also hear a lot of times with multi-stakeholder approaches about not being listened to. There is no need, and I think it was Peter who said it, there's no need for consensus. There's need for a general agreement. So my question to you is, when you're thinking about the activities for the next few days, what are you prepared to agree upon, and what are you prepared to negotiate, and what are you prepared to put to the side? Because maybe it's not possible to get everything you want when you are trying to achieve some common goal. Your common goal might be just 1% of the thing that you're doing. And I think this is a problem that is faced across the board. Now, another area that hasn't, outside of what the Honorable Minister had said, that hasn't really been talked about much, and sometimes I would say people get the perception that the public sector is a little bit slow to move. And I think a lot of it has to do with awareness. And I believe that I don't want to confuse awareness with transparency. I want to talk about awareness in the point of view of being able, and I think Maria said it as well, accountability. What are we responsible for? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? A lot of the times it's work in progress. Danny, you said it. You said that you recognize there were a lot of things that are going on. The question sometimes is, do people know? How can they be part of the process? I think as well that Maria mentioned the issue of now that you have some understanding of what you're doing, then how are you going to, as a group of stakeholders, sort of move forward? And that is also part of the equation. Now, in giving and in accepting that you may not always agree, you may have to deal with structural changes and issues of governance. I think that is particularly important when one thinks about the role that the public sector plays in the multi-stakeholder process. sometimes there's the role of the problem solver, the role of the facilitator, the role of the, I want to separate that in terms of the legislative, the economic, and so on, the things that only they can really drive based on how the systems and the institutions are set up. And when you think about it, and hopefully over the next few days, I want us to really consider that in many instances, the difficulty or the conflicts that arise that impede the multi-stakeholder process generally derive from something that one or many stakeholders may not necessarily understand or appreciate about something else that another stakeholder might be doing. Now, with that in mind, I think those were just some little points to plug in to what has been said already, and I just wanted to throw that out. So I'd hand back over to you, Danny, at this point, and I welcome any questions and the discussion to pursue.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter, Maria, Sean. Multi-stakeholderism is a word that I came across. If you look right at it, it will take half your line in it. So that's what we're all talking about. And let's have the let's have people see who Sanjay is. Sanjay is co-moderating this session, and Sanjay is monitoring the chat room for questions from participants so that we can bring it to the panel. So we have the panel now, and we're moving straight into the questions and answer sessions. And a lot of good things have been said. In fact, it's exactly what we wanted from the three panelists. You've opened out the topic in such a way that it's actually going to engage a lot of discussion with participants and among yourselves. So let me just, well, if you can spotlight the panelists. To all the panelists, let me just kick off a question. And Sanjay, when I'll call on you at the appropriate time to actually bring forward the questions from the chat room.
Sure, no
but to all the panelists, and here's Sanjay.
Thanks, Danny.
Sanjay is our co-moderator. Sanjay, want to just introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. Sanjay Bahadur Singh. Nice to be on this panel with those panelists. I look forward to your questions. As Danny mentioned, I'll be monitoring the chat, and should you have any comments or question, feel free to direct, and I will ensure that is channeled to our panelists. Thank you.
Great. So for all the panelists, do you think that a multi-stakeholder approach is essential to successful digitalization? And if so, why? Very broad question, but it gives you an opportunity to talk about the whole issue. Peter?
You want me to go first?
Well, I'm seeing you on the screen.
I think any time that you're trying to pull people along, then it needs a multi-stakeholder approach. You need to get people involved. As I said a little bit earlier, I think the most difficult thing is identifying the people that need to be involved. And they're not always evident. And some people we think should be involved shouldn't be, and others we don't get involved should be. You know, to me, this concept of multi-stakeholder approach, it's like we're pretending that it's a new thing, but this has been around since time immemorial. There's nothing new here. We just need to talk to people and get their input like we would in anything. Like we had the Minister Weston earlier. I'm sure when they go out to talk about developing laws, they reach out to people to get input. And I think that's the same thing that's required here.
Great. Maria, you were talking about multi-stakeholderism really at a micro level. Peter was talking about it at a macro level. Tell us what you feel in terms of the multi-stakeholder approach is essential to the success of digitalization.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? So I'm not going to say yeah and yeah, that's a given. I think what we have to look at it from is, again, going back to what end, right? What are we all trying to achieve? And I'm just looking at the chat here, and there's a comment or question. And I think this has been why we have failed in moving forward. And somebody was asking, if multi-stakeholderism is pursued, how is intellectual property individually identified? And why I'm saying this has been the root cause of us moving forward is we always seem to go back to what is it in for me, not what is the bigger picture. Everybody wants to be the star. So the young people might not remember, and why I'm going into this is because we are in a small economy. A small economy means that we can't have 10 people doing the same thing. So when Sean mentioned that we also have to understand how's our role, and Peter just said it, who needs to be there? Who is the best in that role? If we have 10 people that could do the same thing, and how do we all understand what we're trying to achieve? You know, when we do team building exercises sometime, we give a team and we just, each person has a part that they need to draw. And it never ends up being what the whole is supposed to look like, because no one knows what the other one is supposed to be doing. And no one understands what we're all trying to achieve. It's the same thing here. So I think we need to get out of this individualism for multi-stakeholder to really be a success. Because we're saying, yeah, we're all working together, you know, but we're all working together for what is best for me, but not what is best for the overall objective. So I'll hand it over to Sean there.
All right. You know, Danny, I think we need to shift the order of this, you know, because I have to agree with everything that is being said already. What I would say is, as Maria said, is a no-brainer. Yes, multi-stakeholder. Another analogy, if you permit me to, think about the human body. We can't survive if any of the organs or the essential organs are missing, can we? There are some we can survive without, but they do play a role. But again, the whole point of the human body, the doctors, the medical doctors may not agree with me. It's really to keep the brain moving, but the brain can't do anything without the rest of the parts, generally, right? So this is where we talk about that issue of, you know, your thinking, your intellectual exercise, as it relates to, as has already been said, what is in it for me? Why am I in this? What do I stand to benefit? And in answering that, as Maria also mentioned and Peter also mentioned, you really need to think about what is the common goal. You can't think about everything in the bucket. You have to think about the drops that relate to you. I don't want to go into a mathematical visualization with Venn diagrams, but you don't always have overlapping interests. So it's really key to focus on what is important in that respect. And to sort of throw something else out there, in terms of an experience over the last 2 years, and the minister would have mentioned it. I don't know how many of you were familiar with the Hack TT exercise that came out. It was really about a collaboration, or I would say multi-stakeholder engagement involving members of the public sector, the ICT community, private sector, particularly in terms of crafting the terms of reference and in mentoring the next generation tertiary level institutions. And between you and me, I really wanted secondary school as well in it, and maybe even primary school, but you know, it was a pilot. Also, government ministries, divisions, and agencies were involved because they had the problems. It was about a year. It took about a year and change just to dialogue to understand what are the things the different actors want to get out of it. And maybe not all actors were included in that pilot, but the success to me was in the fact that the students got mentorship. The government agencies got proofs of concept on digital services, and Maria pointed to the bigger picture in terms of why, but getting to that, you know, the activities like this could funnel into that sort of activity. At the end of the activity, the students were recognized. The students had their intellectual efforts rewarded and showcased. They are currently being piloted to different degrees within the different recipient ministries, divisions, and agencies. The minister referred to employ TT. That was one of the things that was looked at. Additionally, there was benefit, I believe, I stand to be corrected, but in terms of the initial discussions, a lot of the mentors from the private sector, it isn't only about, you know, corporate social responsibility and waking up feeling nice in the morning. They got the hidden CVs of these students. They got to see what they really could do. They got to see that there are opportunities to draw on these students, maybe by interfacing with academia to solve some of their own problems through those sort of collaborations. And I think that's something that You see a lot in many developed countries, and I wish that we could see a little bit more of that in our part of the world as well. So Danny, I'll just hand you back over with that, but I think that's what it really sits at to me in terms of what's the recipe for success.
And following on to what you're saying, we have to not only look at the dark side of digitalization, we have to look at the positives, because there are tremendous positives. There are a lot of dark sides, yes, but those things can be manageable. And of course, they are better manageable if a multitude of people come together to manage them, rather than leaving it up to one individual as such.
Danny,
Sanjay,
if I may, Danny,
okay.
if I may, sorry for interrupting you, Danny. Good morning.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to say that I'm listening to the conversation, and I've listened to the same conversation for the last 20 years. The thing is, talking about we are the ones to do it, you know.
Of course.
We are the drivers, but I keep coming to the same conversations all the time. And Dr. Rock is saying he's sitting in a very crucial position. You know, it is not about agreeing what everybody else is saying. We are the one who have to drive it. And to coin both Danny and George's mantra for the last 20 years, we have to have a champion. Well, who is the champion? Who will it be? Will it be Danny? Will it be George? Will it be Dr. Rock? Who will it be? It's not somebody else's responsibility. It's our responsibility. And I'm saying our because I include myself in that, because I've been involved in this for the longest while. We having these same conversations over and over again. As somebody new comes into the picture, we start over the conversation.
Yep.
We are asking non-IT people to champion our cause, and it's not going to work. We have to champion our own cause. What is IGOV doing to further IT in the country? We still don't have IT in Toco in a meaningful way. We still have pockets of internet in Los Bajos and those places. In the last 20, 30 years, we're doing this thing. So, you know, good conversation, but let's take it a step further.
Okay.
I agree.
Totally agree. And yes, I have been a player in this sphere and trying to get greater uptake in what we now call digitalization for the better part of 3 decades. Let's following on that point, before we take some questions through Sanjay. Peter, the issue of champion, is there a champion, or is there an entity that we can actually identify as a champion for digitalization in Canada?
Well, that's a tough question.
Yeah,
I would say that the answer I would have given is I think the government has to lead this. Okay?
Yep.
And the reason I'm going to give that bad answer is because in Canada, where we see the government help this concept of digitalization is through the programs that it has in place. So one that's very popular is one called the SRED credits, and that stands for Scientific Research and Experimental Development. Now it's a tax credit, which means you have to have some revenue, but at least it gives relief to small companies to do innovation, right? And we also have other tax benefits. So whether you capitalize something or operationalize it when it comes to expenses also has some impact. We're also trying to set up more, you know, like we have an organization called the BDC, which specifically lends money to small, you know, innovative companies, right? So you need to free up capital to support the small innovative companies. And I think that has to come through, you know, through regulations, legislation, and government, because we can't do it as a company. But can I just say one thing before I move on? I want to go back because it's hidden in that question, and I just wanted to point out and say that what Maria and Daniel said was absolutely correct. I mean, you have to alter your vision before you try to reconfigure your business model. So this is true at a macro level, at the government level, as well as at the organizational level. You know, about 30 years ago, I saw a vice president from the Toronto Dominion Bank do a presentation, and he used the term that I've used ever since because I thought it was brilliant. And it goes to what Maria was saying. He used the term electronic verifying. So what he meant by that is you can cover over your lousy old processes and your lousy old company using shiny new technology, but it's still the lousy old processes, right? So you probably heard the expression lipstick on a pig, rearranging the chairs on the Titanic, paving over cow pastures. It's all the same thing. Unless you actually re-engineer something and do something differently, then all you're going to do is the things you're doing now faster, and that might be more disastrous for your organization.
And that's the big difference between automation and transformation, is what Peter's talking about there. Transformation is about completely changing the way that you do things. And, you know, I get frustrated as well the same way. We're having the same discussions for the last 20 years. The minister talked about building a culture. And I tell many of the CEOs I work with, they say, oh, help us create our culture. Help us write a culture statement. You don't write a culture statement. You act a culture. You lead a culture. And I think we get too much into, you know, democracy is a good and a bad thing. I think somebody said it earlier. We don't need consensus. We need to agree that this is the best way to go. And the leaders need to lead that charge. And I'll give some other examples globally. So in Nigeria, which we know how a lot of issues with corruption, it was their central bank that took the lead on a cashless society. They forced the banks to change their technology. They incentivized people not to use cash. That's how you drive real change. Somebody on the top has to say, guess what? This is just how we're going to do it. We don't want SEA no more. This is how it's going to be done. We're going to give everybody the best teachers because we can now digitally offer that to all schools. But somebody has to take the mantle and say, this is what is best. Get all the stakeholders who need to be there involved and then just do. That's our whole problem. We talk, but we don't do.
And in fact, it's a pity I'm just a moderator because this is sore points that has been festering for 2-3 decades with me and with IT in small little Trinidad and Tobago. But I see that Albert Daniel has his hands up. Let's get a quick statement from Albert and then move on to some questions through Sanjay. Albert?
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, first of all, would like to congratulate the TT-MAG on executing this very important forum, the TTIGF 2021, because in this day and age, having these kinds of discussions will play an important part in ensuring that developments move in the direction that they need to. Now, in ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, we are based on the multi-stakeholder model. We have spaces for business, government, end users, technical community, and country code managers, and so on. So all of the policy that is developed within ICANN for internet is actually based on the multi-stakeholder model. And I have to say that what I've seen is that Trinidad and Tobago has been very effective in playing their part in all of these different stakeholder groups. So, but what we are seeing now is a little bit of a change, which is why I like Sean's analogy of having a seat at the table vis-a-vis having a seat in the kitchen. Because it's one thing to be at the table, but if you're not active in making inputs, in stating concerns, then that seat at the table is not really effective. What we are seeing now is while there used to be good participation in the past, that seems to be falling off a bit. Trinidad still has seats, with regard to government, end users, technical community, and so on. But the people who have been working hard, some of them are at this TTIGF, are suffering from burnout. So my question to the panel is, how do you deal with that issue of sustaining enthusiasm for participation in the multi-stakeholder model? Thank you.
Good. So, panelists, anybody
Sean,
feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I was getting up to go because I also wanted to kind of, I wanted to answer it, but I wanted to add to the discussion before, in a sense, because it sort of fits in with what I'm about to say. So in terms of and this is something from my academic seat that I tend to look at a lot, and I can't remember who said it earlier, but it has to do with a sense of national service. It has to do with a sense of understanding what are the things you want to derive benefit from. Before COVID, I was probably clocking about 140 hours a week working, of which 100 or so were online. There are 168 hours in the week for those who don't know. So I can't claim that I suffer from pandemic fatigue and burnout because it's always been like that. But especially now, I think where a lot of people are getting into the digitalization artificially accelerated because of everything in front of us and all of the other issues, the human issues associated with it. What helps me, to be very honest, especially in teams, is the cliched team building, the taking us a little lunch meeting, a little time to just have a dialogue. Sometimes one of the biggest issues I have encountered working with teams, especially in a multi-stakeholder type of arrangement, is that there's a drift in awareness of what is going on with the different agents. And usually when you're knee deep in the execution of something, or even in the dialogue leading towards planning for the execution, it's always good to establish proper lines of communication and to really maintain those lines of communication. You can't be so busy that you're unable to share information with each other, because that communication channel is essential to the process. And with that in mind, I just want to just go back a little bit. With respect to the question that the comment that John had made earlier, I do agree that there needs to be a champion. The question of who is the champion, sometimes we lump everybody into the same bucket. And that's why I say we need to clarify the rules. And the thing about transformation is it's less revolution and more evolution. So things change. For example, does anybody think that what is the role that, let's say, a certain random state enterprise responsible with the mandate for advising government on matters of ICT, what is the role that they should take in this day and age compared to what it was 10 years ago? Those are the kinds of discussions that need to be had. Those are the things that determine what you can and cannot do. I think that because of the need for awareness, and I take it upon myself that is something that I as well need to do more of. We need to be more aware of what is going on. Work in progress can't remain hidden, for one. But also, what are we required to do? What are we being asked to do? Sometimes, for the sake of the greater good, another term that has been used, you step outside of your bounds and the lines become blurred. And sometimes it happens so many times that you tend to lose your roles. So again, that comes back to issues of governance, which comes back to the question of who is the champion and what are the roles of the different people in the kitchen and at the table.
And can I just support your statement? To support the statement, hold on, John. We've got to give a lot of people opportunities to talk. To support the statement, Sean, we have to learn from our history in IT advocacy rather than seeking to redo. And every time we have somebody who is the de facto champion, that person seeks to redo all that has been done in the past, and we don't seem to move forward enough. But Sanjay,
yes,
you to the chat room, some questions for the panel.
There's been a lot of chat relating to education. They've been talking a lot about the multi-stakeholder process. There are a few comments here that I'm going to go into, but before I get to that, there's this is a YouTube question, and I'm going to throw it out. It hasn't been directed to any one of our panelists, but what has been the biggest challenge in rolling out e-governance? That's an open question to the panel.
I could start. I would say clarification of roles in one respect, resourcing in another respect. I think that has a significant part to play. Sometimes you're bound. As a simple example, there was a recent committee meeting, I mean recent over the last 12 months or so, whereby one of the particular challenges that is faced is the issues of people and resourcing. What can you do to make sure that you are properly equipped with and are able to retain those individuals or those groups that can assist you or that can encourage the transformation that you need to do? And this is why when you look not when you know you hear these things, I've been hearing it myself, not for 20 years like Danny, but definitely for some time. You know, you hear the same arguments as John as well pointed out. You hear the same comments, and what is different? And it's unfortunate. And I'll push this analogy to you. Sometimes it's not for lack of doing. Imagine you had a building. This is a nice building. You've done your part to build it. It's a little bit expensive, but you want to now sell it to somebody. And because of the expense associated with the building, you need to go through some processes to allow the bank to finance it for potential clients. Let's just say, right? Now, when you go and you do that, there are some processes to do that. And sometimes we know that those take a long time. Yeah. Let's say, for instance, those processes are sorted out and let's say through digitalization, you can do a lot of those things. Even so, let's say somebody moves into the building, there's the issue of maintenance, especially in the realm of ICT, things change. So while we might have been in a position, let's say, where we might have had a certain standing at a certain point on the timeline, over time, that's going to change because technology changes, things change, we need to evolve. So I think sometimes that is the thing that we need to look at as to why is it that we feel and we observe from what we see and hear and taste and touch and smell that we are seemingly in the same position every time. I don't think that we necessarily are in the same position every time. I think that what happens is that we we do move sometimes, but things need to be maintained and effort needs to be put on ensuring that we maintain that level of status as well.
Sean, I want to go one step further. I want to probe you a little more, and I believe I could do that. Right, Danny, with your permission, of course.
Sure.
Sean, judging from the comments that we've seen here and your response to that question, for the benefit of everyone here, would you be in a position to help bring some clarity to the role that iGovTT has in this transformation, if any?
Certainly, I can do that, and I'll try to do it in just 2 or 3 sentences if possible. First of all, given the mandates that are put on us, based on the current governance structures, the company essentially is tasked as it relates to certain matters of ICT to help those in the ministries, divisions, and agencies who can, as well as those who may not be necessarily equipped to do so. And what do I mean by that? We are here to help with the government through advising on matters of standardization and interoperability, for instance, for helping to put those frameworks in place. Another thing that the company looks at as well from an operational perspective has to do with the building blocks that would allow you to effect a lot of these digital services. So the underlying infrastructure, the various building block services. We've moved a little bit more into rolling out certain services such as government payment solutions to assist in the development of these services. And these are just some of the things that we do. The other side of it is as it relates to the other 4 pillars of the National ICT Blueprint. So one area that we were particularly focused on over the last 2 years or so has been that of capacity building, and that's where the HackTT concept came from. Because it's one thing to build out our internal infrastructure to allow government agencies to interact using those infrastructural services, email, etc. It's another thing to now re-engineer the processes to get people to rethink how they do things so that you can, I would say reinvent, but change the way that you deploy digital services. And that was one of the things that we were looking at in this HackTT pilot. It was really just to get the people talking, to understand that you don't try to take the paper process and put it on ICT. That's not going to make sense. That's one side of it. so it's a multifaceted role in that regard. So it's not about, let's say, necessarily putting a laptop for a student, let's say, as an example that you hear a lot about now. But what it is about assisting those as it relates to putting a laptop forward for the students. What are the standards you should use for the laptops? Are you making sure that you have the proper user requirements specified? Have you considered some of those things? Have you considered leveraging strategic partnerships or such? Have you the necessary backing to effect the procurement process in a clean, transparent manner that is beyond contestation? Those are where the activities are. But I dare say that, unfortunately, sometimes a company with circa, I'd say 100 employees or so, we are tasked to do many things, and that is for the greater good. Sometimes you just have to do it, because if you don't do it, it's difficult to move to the next step. And if we didn't do those things, then you wouldn't be seeing things like TT commute coming up. You wouldn't see things like employee TT, our government payment, the chatbot solutions that are being used right now, assisting and participating in various awareness and stakeholder processes. For instance, the ICT roundtable discussions that we had at the height of the pandemic, and just providing general awareness and support to various people through symposia and so on. So that is it. I think the biggest challenge, however, is that our prime customer is really government, but the things that government do affects the citizens and the businesses, the other stakeholders. So I think that's where a lot of the blurring happens. How much of our role in awareness should focus on the citizen facing, the business facing, the MDA facing awareness? And I believe that is something that we have to work a little bit more on, and I know that we are working on it, so that a lot of these blurred lines hopefully with time should be clarified more.
Great. Thanks for that, Sean. Moving on that and allowing others to come into the conversation, let me just hand over to Maria. You have a contribution here?
Well, I want to just take this back a little bit, right? And it's a study that we did a couple of years ago on digital governance and where the board comes in and why some things aren't being done. And I want to put it in the context of part of what Sean said there in the end with the awareness. But he's talking about awareness at this level. Let's start with the knowledge at this level. Where there's lack of knowledge, there is fear. And when there's fear, people don't want to do things. So the first thing we have to ensure is that decision makers understand. They don't have to write a program, but they have to understand how technology works and how it can really make the transformation happen. But when you have people sitting down making a decision and seeing lots of chat here about young people, when I have training now or I have discussions, my lowest level staff are involved because they know more about the technology than I do. They know what's happening out there and their contribution is significant. So we need to widen the diversification of the brain that goes into the decision making. We have to ensure that people who are making the decisions have been educated themselves to understand. You can't have a vision if you don't even know what's out there. To understand that if we know what exists, or if we understand what exists, then that helps us build a vision and even executing it. So I'm seeing everybody here talking about the under 30s, etc. 3/4 of my staff are 25 years old. And they sit at the dinner table and they get to share. Sometimes they don't have the experience, and I'll say, okay, guys, 50 years old, does have some value still, and this is why. So I think when we're talking about awareness, it goes two ways, and I think broadening the minds that sit at the decision-making table is important if we really want to see transformation.
Sanjay?
Thanks, Danny. Thanks, Maria. Thanks for that contribution. Well, let me hand it back over to you, Danny, with this question. And this is a question really that piggybacks off of what Sean said, what Maria said, in terms of that broadening the scope. So what do we need to do in order to make that happen? So it's very calculated. What would be our next steps?
I don't want to take up the floor too much and comment, but I noticed, I'll just jump in very quickly. I'll make it quick this time. I think we need to dialogue. That's really it. We need to have an opportunity to facilitate discussion and hear the points and really come to some sort of understanding. I think that is probably in a nutshell what we should be doing as the immediate next step.
But also to support what Maria said, we need to be willing to dialogue. And sometimes, and this is both the public and private sector, so it's no one more than the other, you don't have sufficient will to actually have that dialogue. And in fact, for some people, it's easier to actually not entertain the dialogue because they feel it's too painful because it's not the area of expertise. But let's hear from Peter.
Yeah, I was just gonna, I have to say something now because, I heard what Sean said just recently, what you just said, and I'm sorry to say this, but talk is cheap. It's time for somebody to come up with the Benjamins. And I'm going to tell you, I've seen so many failed digital transformation projects in the last few years. And it's because, and George Gobin will love this, there's a lot of technical debt out there, right? And I have clients who are trying now to use the latest and greatest products, yet they still have Windows 2000 Server or Windows 2008 Service Pack 1. So there's all this technical debt. We have to address the technical debt and spend some money doing that. We have to spend money on educating people. We have to spend money on awareness. We have to spend money. It's all about money. Talk is cheap. I think the time for talk is long past and you need to do something. And I just wanted to circle back to Albert Daniel's comment about burnout. There's no question there's a lot of burnout. And you see that in a lot of these digital transformation projects where they're given unrealistic deadlines of like 18 months to put in all this new technology. But I just want to mention in Canada today, we call it Mental Health Day in Canada today. And anybody who texts and uses any of the Bell services, Bell will donate 5 cents to the mental health because there is a serious mental health crisis going on in the world right now.
Good. Sanjay, any other questions?
Yes, I do. I have another question here. I'm going to thank Denise Alyong Thomas for this question. And her question to everyone is, who is going to conduct a needs analysis of each sector? See you smiling, Danny. Perhaps you want to...
No, I have comments, but I think maybe that's the panel to respond.
So, sorry, what was the question?
The question, Peter, is from Denise Alyong Thomas.
Yep.
Who is going to conduct a needs analysis of the sectors?
Well, again, I think we understand the needs. I don't think you need more paperwork. I've done a lot of work for governments. What happens is they get the report and they put it on the shelf, and then 2 years later somebody comes back and does the same thing, and they put that on the shelf beside the other one. I think the time is now. You need to act. And I thought you were asking another question, which was, how are we going to come up with the money? Well, you heard Maria talk about some places that have had fantastic success, like Singapore, and we could pick on Dubai and countries like that, who have decided to invest for the future. And so your country as a whole has to invest for the future. They have to do things that incentivizes, to use that word that many have, in innovation in companies and in your society. And you can't do it as individuals or as individual companies. You have to do it as a society. You have to decide this is what we want to be. We want to be leaders, not followers.
Yeah, but it's more important, what do you invest in?
Yes.
So I mean, if you think of how budgets are spent, okay, and it goes back to the whole question around, are we spending it on the right things? Have we really spent the time to understand the root cause of why we say the same things every year over and over? And unless you actually solve a root cause, then you never come out of the pain that you were suffering in the first place, right? So, you know, it's just like, you know, all the analogies with the doctor and your body and stuff. If it's the wrong body part you are fixing, then you're never going to be healthy. So yeah, needs analysis. I mean, the amount of consulting, and I'm a consultant, the amount of consulting reports that have been done, I'm sure we will have a whole library filled. But then what do people do with it, right? I mean, if you look at Singapore, right? Lee Kuan Yew was a benevolent dictator, but he has died and his policies have remained. That's when you know you have real leadership. It's when you are gone, what you have implemented continues. So what is the root cause? Could be our politics, but we won't go there. So maybe what we need is some 30 and 40-year-olds to get together and start to lead the change. So the truth is we do have budgets. Our budget is not a small budget, but we don't look at what is the root cause and where this money really needs to go. Somebody just said egos, and that's it. If you have a room of egos, the only thing is a bigger ego and no action.
Yeah. So can I just to jump on something Maria said? I mean, it's so true. It's that, and to go back to what Sean said, if you want to focus on anything in education, Sean, at any level, you got to start teaching critical thinking, because I think there's a serious problem with critical thinking.
Point on.
But to go back to one of the reasons that Singapore is so wildly successful is the mindset of the country, right? They get it. I mean, I remember I was struck one time when I was in Singapore and I went into a Chinese restaurant, and what they had is they had little icons there, and each one of the and this is very low tech but very, very high utility kind of thing. So they had an icon that was a chicken, pork or pig, and a cow, right? And then they were different colors, right? So the different colors, so if you get a red pig, that meant that you wanted noodles and pork. If you got a green pig, that meant you wanted rice and pork, right? So even in their low-tech solutions, they're very, very high-tech in a way, right? And so you need to start adopting that kind of mentality if you want to move forward and compete in today's world.
Because there was vision. There was one man who had a great vision, and he thought about it in every little detail. And you hit it right there on the head. Our education creates people who just want to do what was done before, memorize a definition, but they don't know what the definition really means. I see it in the workplace here all the time. But Maria, the Excel spreadsheet, I say, I don't care what the Excel spreadsheet have, it makes no sense. Common sense, unless we teach people how to critically think. And again, look, we get in the root cause. One of the root causes is our education system. And unless that is changed and we make innovation like math and English, then we're never going to see innovation continuing past our days. It has to become part of the culture.
Absolutely. And one of the challenges we have, and this is taking a dig on government, is our government is steeped in traditional ways of doing things. And their perspective is they want an immediate return. So I'm actually going to spend or invest in this particular sector. Within a year, I want to see a return on it. It's not like that. If you actually invest in technology, it's actually going to be a long-term investment. You are going to see some short-term wins and so on, but the payback is in the long term. Case in point, Singapore. Singapore didn't happen overnight. It took decades for them to get where they are today. But our government right now is very much a traditional approach to actually their operations. Well, hence the reason why we don't have financial management, an integrated computerized financial management system in our government as of today. Hopefully that will change soon, but we actually are so comfortable where we are that it takes something significant like COVID to try and jolt us off out of what was the normal then into a new normal. Okay, Sanjay, and come on, run some more questions.
Well, Danny, we have a lot of comments. There's a lot of subscription to the critical thinking. And while everybody subscribed to that, the key bit here is making that transformation to ensuring that that is now manifested into the actions that we take. And this goes back to the point that Maria mentioned before, broadening that scope So the critical thinking needs to come at all levels. And there's some measure for accountability and transparency, which has been highlighted as perhaps areas that we need to pay a little more attention to. So I wouldn't want to go too much into some of the comments, mindful of time. So what I want to suggest, Danny, is perhaps you invite our panelists to make some closing remarks based on the discussions we've had here, so that we can ensure that we remain on time. We've got 10 more minutes.
Sure. And probably what I can ask as a final question to lead into the candidates, the panelists making their closing remarks. How can we determine effective regulation in a digital world using this multi-stakeholder approach? And it brings it back to the topic, and it actually will encompass some of your closing comments. So any one of the panelists to go first.
Sean, you go.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I thought it was ladies first, but it's
Well,
all
I
right.
could go ladies
No,
first.
no.
I'll be short and sweet.
Oh God. So you want me to take up the 10 minutes and leave you with, right. Danny, just repeat the question again, just because I just want to make sure I clearly answer exactly what it is you are asking again, please. And for the benefit of one or two people who just messaged to ask that you repeated, they had a break.
Okay, sorry. How can we determine effective regulation of the digital world adopting this multi-stakeholder approach?
All right. So I think one of the key things, and I mean, I said this before in many different fora, and I know that it will be a growing concern. And it's not because of lack of progress. It's because even if you attain what you attain, things change. And that's sort of the premise behind a vision. It's kind of over the horizon. So I think that governance is key. Governance as it relates to who are the stakeholders, what are their roles, what are we trying to accomplish, how are we going to accomplish it? In a nutshell, I believe that is key. I've taken on board a lot of the comments, and I enjoyed the conversations so far. But one thing that I want to suggest as well is that communication, that communication has to always be there. To me, whether it's the same message or not, that should tell you something. If it's the same message, ask yourself the question, why is it the same message? Why is it perceived that the wheel is being reinvented as opposed to maybe getting some refurbishment, for instance? I think that speaks volumes to one of the critical elements that needs to be had. So in general terms, clear and effective communications are key to the multi-stakeholder approach, as is the governance process, the governance that specifies the process and the interactions and the interfaces between the different agents.
Good. So Maria, you ready?
Well, the first thing I would say about the regulations is let's not take 5 to 10 years to get it done, because by the time it's done, it's already outdated. So a law that was drafted in 2006 get passed in 2018, 2020. What happens is it's already outdated. So when we're talking about this whole stakeholder approach, it's not just about the content, but also having people to push it forward. And, you know, somebody mentioned earlier that we have to be the actions of change. So we are the ones, private and public sector, every citizen has to come forward and say, this is the better for me. We go on Facebook to talk about all kind of foolishness in this country. But instead, why don't we push for the things that need to be done to help the transformation? That's our role. We have to be the activists. We have to be the ones that says this education system is not working for us. We have to push the change, but we all are very complacent. So I think for me, my little pet peeve with the regulations is let's not take 5 and 10 years to pass it. We need to be more agile. We need to push things forward, and we need to do it now. So my message is now is a great place to start. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, as Sean said. All we need to do, and we don't need to copy exactly what was done that does not suit our environment, right? We are different. Our makeup is different. Our size is different. What we need to do is look at what works best for our environment and just do it.
Good, and we don't necessarily need to reinvent what has been successful elsewhere once it's actually applicable to our environment.
Applicable, exactly.
Yeah. And Peter?
So, as I've listened to this discussion and the things that are coming out of our mouths, I'm struck by a few things. And one is yes, the governments in most locations are putting things online, but I don't consider that a transformational act, if you want. Exactly. The government has to re-engineer itself and to consider what is its vision for serving the people that, of the countries that you and I are both in. Because if we keep doing, I think it was Albert Einstein, doing the same thing and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. So if we keep doing the same thing over and over again and then wondering why we're getting the same results, like we're asking for the same results. And I just want to add what you said and Danny said, what Danny said and Maria said, was that at the end of the day, it comes down to leadership. And it comes down to, as I said before, it comes down to the Benjamins. Somebody has to cough up some money. Right? And I think about, I'm often thought when we have these kinds of discussions, I don't know if you've ever heard the old joke about commitment and involvement. And think about your breakfast, okay? So you're having bacon and eggs. Well, the chicken was involved, but the pig was committed. We need commitment, okay? And usually commitment is demonstrated by money.
Good. Well, folks, I actually have to thank this panel for the wonderful deliberations. There's so much more to be said, and I have pages of notes as we were talking, but I have to understand that I am a moderator, I'm not a panelist. There's so much I can say. And a lot of things that you've said, Peter, that relates to the Canadian environment actually exist in Trinidad, but we are not effective at using or utilizing these mechanisms that exist. Yes, it takes too long to pass legislation and thereafter put in place the required regulation. The world doesn't stop turning. We have to appreciate that. So to Peter, Maria, and Sean, thank you very much for your contributions this morning. As I said, a lot of what we are seeing here is opening the doors for the other panelists to actually start addressing specific items. And our next session is really related to cybersecurity, which will be conducted by George Gobin, who is actually gaining a name for himself in advocacy for cybersecurity, not only in Trinidad, but within the region. Thanks very much to the panelists, and you all have been gracious enough to join us in this important IGF. And I'll relate a point that Albert made. He talked about ICANN and the multi-stakeholder approach. And having attended a few of the ICANN annual sessions and so on, I'm amazed that the approach works, but it does. So we have to bear in mind, there are successful entities that actually have adopted the multi-stakeholder approach and are actually succeeding with it. The Internet Society is one, ICANN is another one. Let's learn from them and move forward. So thank you very much, Peter, Maria, Sean, and we look forward to ongoing discussions with you all at some other forum or otherwise. So I'll hand it back to Demise, you the event coordinator. I think we have a brief bio break at this point in time. Demise. Okay, so we have a brief bio break, and we will reconvene at 11:10.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. Welcome to the panel discussion on cybersecurity, the new norm. As you can see, we're very much sticking to our conference theme of digitization, the new norm, and we've just come out from a very interesting panel moderated by Danny Jagannath, which we've all been hearing and understanding the same views that we all have and have emitted from us over the years. My name is George Gobin, and I'm a director with the TTIGF, and I'm very pleased to be your facilitator for this panel today. Now, according to cybersecurity ventures and cyber attacks are on the rise, and they're really estimated to cost at the end of 2020, cyber attacks were estimated to cost organizations around $20 billion US. That's really a whole lot of money, $20 billion, when the risk or entry is very such low, and all you have to be able to do is a good fisher or be able to get on the dark web to get ransomware or malware that's available for you for a cheap price. As defined by CISA USA, cybersecurity is the art of protecting networks, devices, and data from unauthorized access or criminal use, and the practice of ensuring confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information consistently. We have all become very heavily reliant on the internet for communications, entertainment, transportation, online shopping, health, etc., on various types of devices. The COVID-19 virus has exacerbated use of terms like digital transformation as an, in fact, increased reliance on use of the internet to conduct our businesses and, in fact, to conduct our daily lives. However, as our reliance and usage of these systems have increased, a new breed of criminal has further emerged out of the shadows, known as a cyber criminal, who is constantly trying to gain access to our computer systems. And he did this initially as a subject of self-satisfaction and self-aggrandizement. But now more and more, we are seeing this as being used as a source of ill-gotten wealth. Computer viruses have been around for a long time since the advent of computers first started proliferating in the 70s. And what we are experiencing now seems to be modern-day versions of this, with technologically advanced software that has morphed into new words in our vocabulary, like phishing, like spear phishing, social engineering, denial of service attacks, man in the middle, cross-site scripting, and most recently, a lot of ransomware attacks being administrated or run on the web. The panel that we have brought together today will discuss what we as individuals, businesses, academia, and governments should know about this menace, and how do we protect ourselves from financial ruin, loss of privacy, loss of intellectual property. This panel will seek to use known cybersecurity breaches to illustrate the costs and harms incurred, whether financial, personal, or otherwise. What we are hoping for at the end of this panel discussion, you as our audience today will leave with a much better understanding and perspective of cybersecurity and the steps you need to protect yourself, your family, your business, and your employer. Let me first of all introduce you to our illustrious panel, one by one, as I ask them to give a 5-minute overview on the topic and their take on it. I will only do short bios, and their full bios will be available at our website on this event page, www.igf.tt. This panel that we brought together really brings a lot of industry experience and guarantees that they will do justice to this topic, cybersecurity, the new norm. The first panel this turn, I'd ask Carrie-Ann Barrett to ensure her camera is on so we can all see her. Carrie-Ann is the Cybersecurity Program Officer with the Organization of American States. In her capacity, she offers technical assistance to member states in the development and implementation of their national cybersecurity strategies, as well as assist in the implementation of various technical projects with the cybersecurity program. She's also an attorney at law with over 13 years of experience, spanning both Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. In addition to her legal professional experience, she has had appointments with the Ministry of National Security, Trade and Industry, Labor and Small Micro Enterprise Development, including legal consultant to the CARICOM Secretariat and the ILO Sub-Regional Office for the Caribbean. Mrs. Barrett holds a certificate in cybersecurity risk management, a postgraduate diploma in international arbitration, and a master in business administration, and an LB certification in legal frameworks for ICTs. Mrs. Barrett's expertise covers electronic commerce, internet governance, cybersecurity, and more recently, she has led to the development of the national cybersecurity strategies for the Bahamas, Costa Rica, Jamaica, Suriname, Dominican Republic, and has helped Colombia, Mexico, and Peru in developing their national cybersecurity frameworks. Good morning and welcome, Carrie-Ann. Please proceed to give us your take on this topic and how we should be looking at going forward with this discussion. Carrie?
Thanks so much, George, and hello everyone, and happy Data Privacy Day. I think it's important to kind of bring attention to that since we're doing the topic of cyber and data privacy is so closely related. I have 5 minutes. I'll try and give you, I told George I'll try and focus on what's happening in the Caribbean at large, give you a more regional perspective because we have very, very good speakers who will give you more specifics on some of the topics that we want to cover in cyber. So one of the resources I wanted to share with everyone on the call is a 2020 report that we published recently with the IDB that covers cybersecurity, risk, progress, and the way forward in Latin America and the Caribbean. And in that study, one of the things that we picked up in the region at large with cyber is that many of us have actually improved our cybersecurity, believe it or not. It may not seem as impactful as we would want it to be, but we at the regional level kind of count some of the small progresses that our governments have made. For example, many have actually implemented national cybersecurity strategies. Some have improved their legal frameworks, and many of them have thought about actually personal data protection. Another thing that has happened in the region that we saw though, is that more than 3/4 of the countries that we have in the region don't think about critical infrastructure protection. And for those on the call who may not know, those are the assets of the country that, God forbid, something happens to them, the country will be pretty much vulnerable and at risk. Another thing that we kind of noticed in that report, which I wanted to bring to this panel, is we've had a significant growth in countries thinking about cybersecurity and centralizing it into an entity. So many of them have actually established incident response teams. And that's actually a good thing as well. Trinidad and Tobago has a very good one, and we have someone from that right here. And Trinidad and Tobago has been working closely with the OAS on that and building their capacity. However, as George rightfully said, that with COVID, everyone was thrown online. And cybersecurity, while it was in the back burner for many of us, it's now come to light that digital assets, crisis management is something that we have to think about tangibly. In terms of statistics, I wanted to share some with you that we had. In particular, between November and December in 2020, we did notice that in the Caribbean region in particular, we had an increase and spike in spam, fraudulent spam, targeting accounts throughout the Caribbean. Many of them were trying to make fraudulent activities because we now have, believe it or not, an increase in Bitcoins in the region. There's been an increase of like almost 31,000 USD worth of Bitcoins that kind of flooded into the market in our region. So many of the spam emails that we've detected have the title Bitcoin Money Review. Can you make $1,500 daily with this method? So they've been just targeting many of our citizens with that. And it just shows us that as much as we think the Caribbean is like a small speck in the grand scheme of things, we're not exempt from the dynamism and the ease in which persons are actually targeting our citizens. Many of them are getting social or economic events that happen in seconds. So they're using the pandemic to make malicious activities. The pandemic has become the way in for many of our citizens who are panicked about it, thinking about vaccines, clicking on any email that they see about vaccines, because everyone is so wanting this pandemic to be over. And social engineering is not something new to cybersecurity, but it has now gotten a wider platform with a global pandemic. What we do want to stress that's positive, though, is that although many of our countries have suffered like large losses because of the pandemic in our tourism sector, services, or SMEs, or commodity exports, we know that the impact is going to go beyond 2020 as we try to recover from this. It's going to be a long road back. But what it also helps is that a lot of our governments have now started to think about cyber. We have countries such as Barbados now developing their strategy. Guyana is developing their strategy. Jamaica is reviewing theirs. So there is an increase in awareness of the need to have this on the front burner, not on the back burner. It wasn't just the Caribbean, it was Latin America as well also suffered. We had a couple of instances of something called COVID lock that was gone through most of some of the Latin American countries, where in a matter of seconds, it was targeting individuals and companies. And because persons actually feared the pandemic, when persons clicked on the link, there was a lot of hijacking that happened. A lot of ransomware came out of that COVID lock campaign that they did. Another quick thing, because I only have a few minutes, that I wanted to kind of stress as well is we're a small region, and because of that, many of our parents, grandparents, guardians are in charge of our children. And with this thrust online and everyone going online, a lot of the parents still are not familiar with technology. And they still kind of fear it, and their way of addressing technology is to take it away from the kids. And no, you can't get your phone. No, you can't get your iPad. No, you can't go online. So one of the things I want to leave with us before we go into discussion is I want to implore us to kind of think about the fact that we are now online. There's no going back from this. Our kids are now exposed to it. There's no locking them back in a box and telling them just to watch the TV. So I want to encourage you to discuss internet safety and develop an online safety plan with your kids. For me, when I had to give my 6-year-old a laptop for the first time, it freaked me out because I didn't intend for him to be online until he was like 8. That was my grand plan. And I actually made him sign a contract with me. I wrote a contract and I said, if anything suspicious happen online, what do you do? Tell mom. And he had to sign beside that line. So just actually, you don't have to be, you've now become a CISO as a parent, as a guardian, as a grandmother. You're now the chief information security officer for your house. And as that person, you may not have the technology, but I want you to encourage you just to review some of the apps that your kids are looking at. I check my YouTube things that my kids watch all the time just to see what they're listening to. Simple rules: don't watch adults. Any adult that says anything inappropriate mommy wouldn't say to you, just tell mommy, click it off. And the last thing I wanted to just share with you before I go is just remember that your kids are suffering a lot of anxieties right now as well. And online sometimes is their only outlet. Those who can't go to school and play with their kids who are still doing virtual, wherever you are in the Caribbean, some of them are still only doing virtual school. So think about the anxieties your kids are doing, and this is the human side to cyber, and recognize that if you educate your kids appropriately, you'll have a better relationship with them virtually as well. So I'll stop there, just allow the other panelists, and go ahead.
Good, thank you, Carrie. It's very you brought up some very good important one, very good and important point, especially around use of children using our technology and using it effectively and productively and securely. I'm sure we've all seen the recent TikTok issues that have arisen where kids are trying all kinds of crazy things because they're being badgered or bullied to do things like that. So it's a very important thing that I hope we're able to drill down more into as we get into the panel discussions. Please feel free to add your questions into our chat, and we'll try to have them all answered by the end of the session. I do have the assistance of another TTMAG director, Mr. Dev Tilaksing, who will assist me in getting those questions responded to. Our next speaker is Mr. Anish Bechu. Anish is an ICT security analyst, Trinidad and Tobago, cybersecurity incident response team. And Anish is one of the person that Kerry Ann just was talking about as somebody who's already been doing this and representing Trinidad and Tobago. Anish is an experienced cybersecurity professional attached to the Trinidad and Tobago Cybersecurity Incident Response Team under the Ministry of National Security. His duties vary from incident response, vulnerability, threat monitoring to cybersecurity assessments of governments, systems, and infrastructure. Anish graduated from St. John's University in New York with his BSc in Cybersecurity Systems and Master of Business Administration. He's also a member of the Cybersecurity Industry Advisory Board at St. John's and for the BSc and MSc programs. I'm very pleased to invite Anish to come and say a few words, his overview on the topic and where he would like to point the discussion to. Anish?
Hi, good morning, everyone. So, as George mentioned, I'm Anish Bechu with the Cybersecurity Incident Response Team. And really what I wanted to bring to the forefront today and look at is that COVID really changed how we do business. And almost overnight, it has changed the risk profile, the cyber risk profile of most organizations, right, big or small. And we've been thrust into an area of remote working and having to put systems in place, again, almost overnight to be able to facilitate teleworking and working from home. And with that brings a whole bunch of new systems and software that wouldn't typically be part of your typical IT suite, you know, so in areas where you need to now set up VPN systems for secure access. Some people don't set up VPNs. They put remote desktop straight to the internet. You know, they use various applications, TeamViewer, AnyDesk, and so forth. Really what I wanted to cover today is that we in Trinidad tend to think that Trinidad and Tobago is too small for hackers or threat actors to pay any attention to us. But that's not the case. It's actually very different. How these people make their money, how threat actors make their money is by compromising systems at mass, stealing data at mass, right? And it's very easy to get roped into one of these big mass campaigns. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to go through a couple of the instances that we've seen over the course of 2020 to bring it home as to why organizations need to take cybersecurity important, big organizations, small ones, anything in between, government and private sector. So one of the most prominent things we saw over the entire year of 2020 was attacks against firewall and VPN devices. And it's something that we tracked very closely here at the National CSIRT. So much so that we actually had to alert multiple entities in Trinidad and Tobago about the fact that their firewall, their VPN appliance was actually compromised. So just to give some statistics on that, from January 2020 to December 2020, there were 37 unique devices. I wouldn't call vendors, I wouldn't call any persons, but there were actually 33 different organizations with vulnerable VPN and firewall devices, right? Mainly because they were outdated, they weren't kept up to the latest software upgrades. Some of them were because of security misconfiguration. So these are all things that we need to be on to secure our network. And an interesting fact, out of those 37 devices that were compromised, 28 of them, the credentials for 28 of them, the user credentials for 28 of them ended up on the dark web on various forums. You know, so those those 28 organizations, or actually all 37 of them, had to really undergo really intensive security audits and to go back now to see if anyone actually made it into the network and what did they do if they made it in. Okay. Another big thing that we saw and that Kerry Ann mentioned earlier was the instance of spam. We got a lot. We've gotten reports of a lot of extortion-based spam emails, as well as a lot of Bitcoin-based spam emails. And they're basically trying to trick users, whether private users or users as a part of a company, to send out money, scare them into sending out money. One extortion campaign that we got quite a few reports on was the instance where the attacker claimed to have compromising pictures of the victims, through hacking their webcam and so forth. So these are all events that happen on a daily basis, and we at the CSIRT try to track, mitigate, and respond to most of these instances, particularly for government and government entities when it happens within them. So it's very important to take the necessary actions to protect ourselves, because it's something that happens. Trinidad is not too small for anybody to want to attack, because like I say, information these days is power, and information these days is money. All right. So, I mean, just a couple things to leave you with before I turn over to the next panelist is that, one, pay very close attention to your security. Don't leave it as just an IT responsibility. Cybersecurity is now a board responsibility. There have been cases in the US where board members have been held accountable. CEOs have been held accountable for cybersecurity breaches, right? So this is a board issue now. This is not, you can't just relegate it over to the IT department and say they will handle it. This is a company-wide issue. And just a parting word before I hand over. We send out security advisories here from the National CSIRT. If you'd like to be a part of our security advisories, go to our website, ttcirt.gov.tt. And if you scroll all the way down, there'll be an area to subscribe, and you'll get security alerts from us and security advisories. George, I'd like to hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Anish. And you again brought up some very useful topics that we all need to be thinking about. One of the things that I have learned, and even coming from bringing my own experience to the table, we've seen such an increase in things like ransomware attacks on our businesses, and Bitcoin has become a word in our dictionary. And if you ask any IT person or any internal audit person whether the disaster recovery plans for the company or organizations are up to date, does it have a specific chapter or portion of it that's dedicated to cyber attacks, typically the response that I get is, yeah, we're thinking about it, but it's not really physically there. We will treat it as we go. And if I'd want you guys to take one thing away from this panel today is, please ensure that your disaster recovery plans, which you spent a lot of time putting together, it's properly updated with the challenges of today, which mainly are going to be cyber attacks. I'd like to welcome our next panelist, who is Nicholas Antoniello. Nicholas is the Regional Technical Engagement Manager for ICANN. As a Technical Engagement Manager for the LAC region, or Latin American Caribbean region, Nicholas joined ICANN in March 2020. He's based in the Montevideo office in Uruguay. Nicholas is an engineer and graduated from a university in Uruguay. I'm not going to try to pronounce the name of the university, Nicholas, perhaps you will tell us that. In the field of telecommunications, electronics, and power systems. He also studied engineering in Madrid, Spain, internet governance at Diplo Foundation, SSIG, and USTII, among others. For the last 5 years prior to joining ICANN, he was appointed as a senior advisor for the Uruguayan government's minister in charge of national telecommunications policy, During his appointment to this ministry, he has represented Uruguay at many regional and international organizations and treaties. In the past years, he has been working for the national telecommunications company Antel in different positions. He has been a university professor for over 14 years. He has also been working very closely with the Internet technical community. He's been a chair of LACNIC's Public Policy Forum for over 6 years, technical instructor at the LACNIC events for many years, as well as participating as an instructor in many other courses at the regional level. He participated from the community in the development of the DNSSEC root signing protocol and has been working as a TCR or a trusted community representative for the DNSSEC root signing process and key maintaining protocol. He's also a founding member of LACNOG, or the Latin American and Caribbean Network Operations Group. Welcome, Nicholas, this morning all the way from Uruguay, and thank you so very much for accepting our invitation and bringing your representation to this panel. Nicholas, all yours.
Hi, thanks very much, George, and good morning, everybody. I would like to invest these 5 minutes in some highlights or some comments. The objective of these comments is just to to kind of provoke some reflections, discussion, exchange of ideas, and maybe some questions that hopefully we can enjoy. I don't know if completely answer, but at least to address some concerns of this important topic. First, I'd like to talk a little bit on the threats involving the DNS, specifically not the ones that are against the domain name system itself, but the ones that use the domain name system as a means to perform some kind of attack or cybercrime. As you may know, the most common types of cybercrime involve either what is called phishing, which is the fraudulent practice of kind of sending emails pretending to be from reputable companies in order to induce us, the users, the individuals, to reveal some of our personal information, like passwords, credit card numbers, bank account numbers, etc. So that's the phishing, and that kind of always starts with an email, as Kerry was referring to at the beginning, and Anish also referred to a lot of these attack means or attack vectors. Then there is the malware. The malware is the software. It's basically software that is specifically designed to disrupt or damage or either gain access to some at some level to an authorized. It's unauthorized access, of course, to a computer system. Like this involve the so-called ransomware, keyloggers, rootkits, viruses, all the cyber stuff that you already know. And then there are the botnets. The botnets are a network of private computers, let's say, that are infected with malicious software and controlled as a group without the owner, without our knowledge. This is like accessing our computers without our knowledge and making our devices work in joint to perform an attack or a cybercrime to a third person. So threats make use of the fact that everyone uses the domain name system. We all use the domain name system to translate from the domain names, which is a friendly way of referring to websites and almost any device accessible, publicly accessible device on the internet. The DNS translate those names to IP addresses, basically. So we all use it, and these threats make use of that fact, to perform some cybercrime or some threat. Those threats involve, for example, if you disrupt the DNS, then you disrupt merchant transactions, government services, social networks, etc. You almost disrupt the whole internet if you gain access to a certain level to the domain name system. If you exploit the DNS, you can trick, defraud, or deceive users. Most common vectors of exploiting, include malicious registering domain names, hijacking name resolutions or registration services, corrupting DNS data, etc. And some of the most common attacks that make use of the DNS system are what is called disrupted reflection and amplification. That is normally to spoof the source IP address of a user, for example, or of a website, server, or whatever you want to, to make a denial of service and throw that device a lot of traffic as much as possible, so that that device can manage that traffic and stop providing the service that is meant to provide. Then another kind of attack is what we call resource depletion. The resource depletion is more or less the same, is to to consume or try to consume all the resources of some service device and make that device stop working. Cache, what we call cache poisoning, which is to kind of at the resolver, at the DNS resolver level, they change the registry. They make it they make a DNS resolver answer the user with a wrong IP for a certain domain name. For example, I want to go to my bank account. I type www.mybank.com, for example, and the DNS system will solve that translation and give it an answer to me. And the answer, if the cache poisoning was performed, was successful, what the answer I'm gonna get, the IP address I'm gonna get for my bank won't be the correct address. It will be a fake address with a site that appears exactly the same as the original one, and I will be, giving the password and my username for my bank account to an attacker. Then another kind of attack is changing the user, the resolvers that what we use. That involves normally using some kind of malware to infect my computer and change the way my computer behaves and point when I went to a certain web page, for example, it will route to a fake web page again to get some information, data, or whatever the attacker wants to be able to do. Using the DNS as a covert exfiltration channel, there are techniques that make use of the DNS traffic to embed data and to be able to extract that data from a certain user computer or organization computer. Why they do that? Why they hide the data in the DNS traffic? Because that way they can bypass the firewalls and other security measures. If they are successful in hiding the data, when the computer sends a DNS query, inside the query, it goes my data. So that is another kind of attack. Another kind of attack is to use, that is more or less the same, but the other way, from the one that I just explained, it is to use the DNS as a covert malware channel. That is to command, I install a malware into a computer and use the DNS answers, in this case, to hide commands and to send commands to the malware to be able to, for the malware to attack a third party or whatever. Exploiting IDNs, which is internationalized domain names, can be exploited in a way that point users to attackers' sites, exploiting all IoT and in general any domestic or device infrastructure. So from user location perspective, there are mainly two scenarios here. I think the enterprise one and the domestic one. And I think the main problem, I don't know if problem is not probably the best word because it's not a problem per se, but it can lead to issues and problems. One of the main problems is that from a cybersecurity point of view is that the so-called new normal, has exchanged the former, I mean, the working from the office to working from home. So what can we do? with that, or what can we do to better or to be kind of the more protected we can. I think the first thing to do is educate. I think the second thing to do is to educate, and the third thing to do, guess what, is educate also. So we have to educate people. We have to educate ourselves. We have to take extra care while using our domestic infrastructure, because we are not under the protection of our IT team, which protects our company. In our house, we are the IT team, so we have to protect our infrastructure, or at least we have to learn and be educated to learn what are the threats that we are exposed to and try to mitigate them. Provide tools to organizations and to users to be more and more aware of what's happening inside and outside their networks. Of course, this will raise some privacy versus security considerations, maybe. Taking care of authorizations, registrations, password management, how we manage our passwords, how we do authentication. Do we use two-factor authentication as much as possible? Please try not to use the SMS as a means to send the two-factor authentication. And I have, if I use software in a regular basis, I have to have it, updated. So patch your software, update your software, because normally the companies that produce software try to update it so as to, mitigate all the threats and all the stuff. So in summary, what I try to say is, I think we have to be proactive instead of reactive. We don't have to run away when some issue arises, but to take care of it in an informed and responsible way. I mean, we will still use internet more and more and more. And after this pandemic, the so-called new normal involves using more and more internet every day, as Kerry also mentions. So that are my reflections, and I hope that inspire you to give some reflections, some comments, some questions. Back to you, George.
Good, thank you, Nicholas, and really a good technical overview on the things that we need to be aware of and how we progress. I loved the 3 points that you brought up about the way to solve this problem is really 1, education, 2, education, and 3, education. I think that says it in a nutshell of how we need to go forward. Our final presenter on the panel today is Dr. Rajendra Singh. He's a system engineer from network security at UWI St. Augustine. Dr. Singh, or Raj as we'll call him for this session, holds a PhD in computer science. For the past 16 years to current date, he has defined and held the lead role for network security at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. He has a very broad set of training and experience in cybersecurity, holding as well several globally recognized technical and leadership cybersecurity certifications. Raj has implemented a wide range of innovative solutions for the university, mostly with minimal or very little resources assigned. The latest one, leveraging a vendor's VPN feature to achieve a zero-cost two-factor deployment with self-password resets for close to 2,700 staff working under the new normal at the University of the West Indies. Raj, welcome. Thank you very much for participating, and handing over to you now.
Hi, thank you, George. Good morning, everyone. So, by being last year, you more or less heard the full gambit of cybersecurity that could be discussed in a forum like this. I have an article here which kind of summarizes where the new normal is. This article basically said that 95% of organizations have responded to the survey saying that the first thing that they have to do is change their cybersecurity strategy. Right? The biggest problem they have is enabling remote work at large scale. And as Nicholas mentioned, education, right, for your employees. Network security and threat prevention, those needs to be improved, and it's probably rated at like number 4. Endpoint and mobile security probably go hand in hand with the remote work, because it's either you deploy these endpoints and mobile devices which your organization would normally hand over to the employee, or you do bring your own device. In those cases, Carrie-Ann started off and said, welcome and happy Data Privacy Day. So one of our challenges when you bring your own device, and even providing a device for that employee, how do you protect that person's personal information when it is at home? Let's say they're using their own device. How do you, a lot of employees do not want to use their own device because they think that you are going to be able to retrieve some of their personal information. And similarly, if you give them a device to take at home, that device is connected to their network, right? So how do you protect that privacy? It's always a challenge for us. We tend to go with some sort of client to manage that endpoint. And it remains one of our biggest challenges at the university when we ask you to bring your own device, or if we give you a device, and some people even challenge the 2-factor authentication using an app. Why should I use my personal phone, right? So that's just the tip of the iceberg, but it's a recurring problem that we're having. If I go down the list here, rapid adoption of cloud technology is one of these strategies that we forced into at the university. One of the very first things that we did when this pandemic started and you had lockdown was to move our e-learning platform to the cloud. Most of our services are in our data center. We had to consider the volume of students, close to 20,000 students accessing these services online. So that was what we call a rapid deployment to the cloud. Luckily, we were able to outsource that and do some backend connectivity for the authentication and so on. Right? The last one probably is the unplanned reinvention to cybersecurity business models. So this is ongoing. Right? We have to keep relooking at the cybersecurity model. In our case, we don't even have a cybersecurity team. Right? We for the past 16 years, it is noted that I have led that area for the campus, but I have no staff. And this is a challenge that I have no permanently assigned staff. This is a challenge in many organizations. They don't have budget and they don't have resource for the normal IT operations, much less for cybersecurity. But with this new normal, I think it has bring to the forefront, it is absolutely necessary for us to budget and put resource in this area, otherwise we're going to flop. The earlier panelists spoke about the digital transformation taking place. As part of that digital transformation, ensure you have a budget and a structure, a governance structure that will include cybersecurity. Right? So overall, what we need to do as well, being from academia, I would say we need to build capacity. At the University of West Indies, we have no degree program that is focused strictly on cybersecurity. So a lot of the businesses that need to build that capacity usually have their employees doing certification courses or foreign courses. We need to build that capacity locally and in the Caribbean. I've had some association with the CSIRT, Trinidad and Tobago CSIRT, and some of the training that the OS had done that Carrie-Ann spoke about. It was a 2-week intensive training program in the University of Leon in Spain. And that, when you go there and you look at NCB, that is the local CSIRT in Spain, and you see how they are set up, we ask ourselves, why can't we reach that point? Not just with the CSIRT, but since 2012, and as Maria said in the last panel discussion, we're waiting years and years and years to establish some of these legislation. By the time you establish it, it's outdated. So where is the Trinidad and Tobago Cybersecurity Agency that bill went to Parliament, or the paper came from an interministerial committee since 2012. It went to Parliament and lapsed. We need to actually step up in those areas so that we could have this joint collaboration and this capacity building. We shouldn't just rely, for example, on the national CSIRT. We should have a hierarchical set of CSIRTs within business groups, within academia, within banking industry, because there are different focus in these areas. And that feeds into the CSIRT and back down. So overall, I just mentioned a few of these things categorized. Where is the new normal? To see the discussion, which my colleagues Kerry Ann, Anish, and Nicholas already went into some detail into. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raj, for bringing that experience with academia. And I want to stress again that the purpose of putting this panel together with this level of expertise was to really give you that type of insight into all of the fields that we should all be concerned about: academia, private sector, public sector, and personal usage of computers. You know, when I was growing up many years ago, I heard this metric being talked about back then, that 50% of computer users have been hacked, and the other 50% still don't know that they have been hacked. So I want to take this off with a question to back to Kerry, which she started a discussion on it. Kerry, you know, how much of a threat is cybersecurity in our region and globally? I know you started talking about cybersecurity in our region, but we are such global players now in terms of vendors that we deal with, other countries that we have relationships with. How much of a threat is cybersecurity in our region and globally? Kerry?
I think you could probably take it from, even as much as we don't talk about some of the CARICOM approaches as we should. If you think about the fact that all the way back in I would say probably 2014, 2013, CARICOM heads of government had actually tiered cybercrime as like a tier 1 threat. It's actually been on our agenda for years now. It's not something that hasn't been considered a tier 1 threat. And it's a lot of it is as a result of, as you said, it's lack of knowledge. It's not recognizing that once you're connected to the internet, you're vulnerable. It's not a matter if, it's when. And one of the things that we promote, it's not a matter of being fearful. It's like knowing that if you drive on the street, you could have an accident. But it doesn't mean that you stop driving. It just means that you do the precautions. You put on your seatbelt just in case of an accident. You make sure that you keep your eyes on the road. You use your indicators. So I think thinking about cybersecurity through those lenses, it's not a matter of cybersecurity being a threat, but it's more how can we put best practices in place so that if something happens, the impact is mitigated as best as possible. I think that's the perspective I'd want to throw instead.
Okay, good. Heading a little more into some of the areas of technical background, and maybe Anish, you could give us a feel for this. When I look at the Gartner statistics on where people are being cyber attacked and what their metrics are, Gartner says that RDP compromise is about 57% of the cyber attacks that happen. Email phishing, various forms of email phishing, about 26% comes from that, and other malware, viruses and stuff like that, 16%. So it seems that phishing, RDP compromise, and timed releases of malware seems to be the highest or the most profitable, most consistent, most found. How would you recommend to our audience how they handle these three things: phishing, RDP compromise, time releases of malware? Anish?
So just to give some statistics about those instances before I answer the question. As of this morning, I checked the record this morning, and as of this morning, there are 202 exposed RDP systems in the Trinidad and Tobago IP space, right? That's 202 different machines with a direct line of communication from the outside that attackers can potentially take advantage of, right? So there was actually an increase in that from the beginning, right before COVID into now, of about 17% in the number of open RDPs that we've seen in the Trinidad and Tobago space. Now, in the case of protecting in this sense, right, is that the general rule of thumb is that unless absolutely necessary and that there's no other physical way possible, remote desktop protocol shouldn't be exposed directly to the internet. You access it through a VPN, so you have the persons who would need access to the server or the device. We would have them securely VPN into the network first, and then they could move from there into RDP and into remote desktop and into wherever device they need to get into. In the context of phishing, right, it's really centered around user education, right, cybersecurity awareness. Because no matter how many spam filters and security measures that we do, there's still many instances where phishing emails get through. So really you're relying on your staff at that point, you're relying on your workers, you're relying on the people of your organization to identify what a phishing email is, and in order to do that, they need training to do so, right? And George, what was the last point?
It was time releases of malware, where malware is getting into your system, but it doesn't become activated until 3 months, 6 months later. So all the things that are coming to your system don't get activated for a while. And people who have been getting away from cyber attacks because they feel that they have backups. But what happens is that the malware is affecting the backup. So you can go back 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, and still have your backups being affected with malware. The most recent example of this is something that we've seen called the snake ransomware that actually goes back 1 year before it gets activated. So you may think that you're safe, but your backups are not.
So in instances like that, and we have seen a handful of cases here in Trinidad where the backups were also infected. You know, you get a ransomware attack, or you get some sort of attack on the front end, and you go to restore your data, and your backup data is also compromised to an extent, right? So in instances like this, it really goes towards how do you back up your data, right? Backing it up and leaving it just so is not, you need to monitor what you back up. You need to do your antivirus checks on your backups, right? You know, and you also need to make sure that they work, right? Ever so often, right? You need to make sure that your backups, when you do go for them, right? In the unfortunate circumstance where you have to go for it, right? You know, there was one instance where they put the backup in and the backup was corrupted, right? So we need to look at identifying these things on the network, well, in the backups first, after, and from a network perspective or from a host-based perspective, right? Make sure you have up-to-date antivirus. Make sure you have up-to-date network security systems. In that, when these malware do get activated later down the line, whether it's a month, a week, you know, 2-3 years down the line, you have your up-to-date system that would be able to identify, track, and mitigate it on the spot, and then somebody there who's dedicated to respond.
Okay, good. Thanks a lot. You know, as the world moves away, we've had lots of attacks on the RDP space, and we've had everybody recommends, hey, you should be using VPN and using RDP for internal logons and all kinds of stuff. And the new topic seems to be around identity management. The weakest link in any security chain is the end user. We all know that. They're the people who will click a link, although you can paint it on their foreheads. Do not click that link if it looks suspicious. Do not open attachment. So we're all familiar about how do we get that. But where do you guys think that we should be going next in terms of how do we identify correctly, either through single sign-on, through multi-factor authentication protocols? where is the world heading? Because it's much, from my point of view, it's much easier for a hacker to go after your password and your credentials into a system rather than trying to hack your network firewall appliance or because they are putting in so much security now. And remember, as I said, this is a $20 billion industry. The hackers are want maximum gain for least effort. So they are going to issue a million emails a day, and if they get 2 or 3% responses and compromise your passwords, that's a good payback for them. I was reading an issue on your password and your internet and your email address sells for about $15 US on the dark web. Don't ask me how I got that information, please. So, Nicholas, Raj, can you talk to us a bit about identity management and where we need to go as organizations, as people? How do we manage this whole identification process and raise the level of security awareness? Nicholas or Raj, any one of you guys?
Raj, if you want,
sure.
I mean, I can jump in and then Raj interrupt me. Anish or Raj interrupt me. Whatever you want to make comments or I think that things have changed, not a lot, but significantly when we, mainly not because of the I mean, of course, because of the pandemic, but from a cybersecurity perspective, they have changed in the way we deal with everyday work and with our everyday social development. What I mean with this is that we still access a lot of sites and places using the internet that need for identity. There are many resources that we access that need for or don't need for us to authenticate. So my first reflection will be, or advice will be, okay, only use authentication when you need it, when you really need it. I mean, don't provide your information for when it's not needed, because that's high. That will make more risky your activity. Then, in the cases that you need to provide authentication and on personal information or whatever, for example, accessing bank accounts that we do it in a daily basis to pay for our expenses and a lot of stuff, we are moving from buying in person to buying online, like massively moving to online, buying and exchanging of goods. And of course, you will need to authenticate yourself and you need some kind of identity. So in those cases, it's kind of difficult to tell or to mention a secret receipt to avoid being the target of a threat. But what I should say is that you are the ones, we are the ones that know which is normal and which is not normal. I think we have to educate ourselves. We have to read, but we have to take, to bring the attention that we have to educate our children also, because now they are more and more using the internet and using some in a way they didn't use it before. I mean, it's massively, and they don't know about what is phishing, what is, and they are authenticating when accessing their school resources. They are authenticating when watching, streaming cartoons or whatever they watch on streaming services, and they need to know what is normal and what is not normal, and they need to know what to do in case they find something that looks like no normal. So that would be my first recommendation, to try to educate yourself and your family about this new way of living, let's say. And the other thing is that again, as I mentioned before, you have to take care of your own infrastructure. You have to update your systems, your applications. You have to use strong password. Don't use root /root or password bar /password123, and if they ask me to change the password once a month, don't use password 1, password 2, password 3. Use something more complicated. Maybe use some password admin app. There are a lot of apps to admin passwords, so you can generate a quite strong and strange password and store it there. So you have to don't remember, because passwords that we have to remember are always easy passwords, because we can't remember complicated stuff. So if I generate a random number or character string, I have to store it somewhere or write it down. You can even write it down, in a place that not behind your screen, not in your background, just on your desk when nobody can see it but you. So you do this, okay, you type it, that's okay.
Yeah, Nicholas.
Yeah.
I want to just interject. You said that I can, so thank you. So in terms of the passwords, what I want to ask is how many of our listeners, viewers, use two-factor authentication on their Gmail account, right? Do you know you have that facility? And this is where we have a lot of challenges. The average non-tech user do not go through the process to set up a two-factor, unless, of course, they get prompted over and over and over by those, let's say the Gmail emails that will say, strengthen your security by setting up this two-factor, and then they will go through the process. But it has been shown mathematically that a complex password is not as good as a long password. We will have auditors will come into our organization, they will go through the usual scripts, and it will have a checklist. Do you use complex password? Do you have expiry of 90 days or so on? And those things, it is in the NIST standards that are not necessarily recommended that you do that. Where you should head is with a proper two-factor. And once you do that, if I get your password, I know your username, I get your password, that second factor, which if it's actually personally on you, it's more difficult for that attacker to get to actually complete the authentication process. And we do have some banks in Trinidad where you have, for example, a matrix card. That is a two-factor. You have it on you, but with the type of cameras I pointed out to someone before, you hold that in your hand, a camera, I could pick that up, what the 100x zoom cameras now. Those bank customers, what some of them are experiencing is they have to secure that particular card from their families as well. And that's where your threat is sometimes when it comes to finance, managing your personal finance. We have better two-factor than that. That is across the app-based rolling code, which some of the other banks are employing. So as an organization, when you choose your two-factor, you have different strengths that you could look at, different levels. Now, I'm not hitting the bank that has the matrix card, because you can supplement that with additional things, which they do, by the way. So you have email alerts that follow through when the login occurs, right? So you have to balance that, the cost and implementing it. So the question was, you have free two-factor for your Gmail, do you use it? and why don't you use it? The challenge is always that human factor to set it up, to get it set up. We experienced at the university purchasing a two-factor solution for our VPN. It was, in the early days, it was costly. It actually had an annual fee attached. Then I think that was like about 5-6 years ago. And we moved to another solution that's just a one-time fee. Yet it's too much when you're talking about 2,700 staff to give a two-factor solution that's costing each token about, I think, 300 TT, right? So we had to innovate. When this pandemic started, we actually had just under 200 of those two-factor tokens rolled out. And we hurriedly went to the vendor and asked, what is the cost? Can we get 200 more? But one of the other things that we realized, well, this vendor was running an education program, and I happened to jump in on it. And I discovered that they had a free two-factor, or in a sense, it existed. It was the email two-factor. So within a few days, we actually was able to implement the email two-factor. And basically, we split our VPN into the 3 technologies to balance the load. We had what you call the IPsec VPN with the strong two-factor, which was based on the app and the rolling code. Then we had what we call the SSL VPN, and the reason we went with these IPsec and then the SSL, again, we reached that roadblock where you had to educate the users how to set up the client. The IPsec client more difficult to set up than the SSL client. The SSL client was a simpler configuration. We actually branded it, our version branded it VPN Lite. It took like less than a minute to set that up, and we tagged on the email two-factor on that. Once we do something like that, now you split it out, right, into the category of users. So you now have to reclassify your online users. You have to see what services they require, where they're located, what devices they're using, and reclassify it. As a matter of fact, there's a Gartner report. It's published 30th of June. The title is Designing Security for Remote Workforce Enterprises. And what that report is telling you is, yes, you do all these short gap things, right? But you have to look at the medium and the long-term solution. And the question, some of the questions they pose here, is VPN really the way to go? Right? Is that going to be your long-term solution? Or are you going to be looking more at cloud services? So identity is, if I come back to the question, your identity is tied in back. Sometimes you need these short gap solutions, but you have to look long-term. And what I've been seeing as well is that a lot of identity management is being built into applications. For example, Microsoft Office 365. How many of you have your two-factor rolled out with Office 365? We had to struggle to get that rolled out. Again, we bounce the education aspect for the user, right? How do you communicate that and get the user to use it and even enforce it at times? We have 20,000 students. We have them on the 365 platform. It's not possible for us to turn on the two-factor for them. So when you speak about phishing a while back, you can actually block or stop a lot of phishing that way, because when I say stop, yes, they get your password, but they cannot go further, right? So it is one of the most overlooked area, your two-factor, your VPN, how to stop some of these threats, but also look at it long-term when you move to the cloud. Also think about Porter's 5 forces model. When you go and you start using some of these applications and you're paying for it and you get tied in for that, how easy it's for you to move to another solution? A lot of businesses get trapped like that a lot of times. And we constantly keep that on the forefront, the 5 forces model. Where is your bargaining power? That's what the 5 forces model tell you. Keep the bargaining power on your table as much as possible. Right? It will.
Okay. Right. Thanks so much, Raj. Because we're coming down to the close of our time, I wanted to hold that point because I'm seeing some questions coming up on the chat that might be related for you to give some further explanations on that. I do absolutely agree that the multi-factor authentication, even something I've seen, even IT professionals, we try to insist that we do that in our companies, but we don't take it on personally. And a lot of us don't practice good multi-factor authentication processes for our own devices, our own personal email addresses. We don't. So because I want to get everybody a chance, I've seen lots of questions coming in. And thanks, Anish and Carrie Ann, for posting links on the chat for things that you have been talking about, and very much appreciated. Dev Tilak Singh, do we have any hot issues that have come up on the chat that you'd like to bring to our attention?
Hi, everyone. My name is Devan Tilak Singh. Just confirming you all are hearing me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, there's been a lot of discussion in the chat with sharing of resources, cybersecurity resources, and so forth. But two questions have emerged. One is from Suzanne Andrews, and she asks, well, a lot of us are experiencing Carnival to Banker, and there are now several paid virtual events being advertised. So which body monitors and regulates online payment systems and online financial transactions in Trinidad and Tobago? In other words, if there's Carnival-related fraud occurring, to which body does the public report? That's the first question. Shall I?
Okay. No, let's take that first question. I'm not sure, Anish or Kerry.
Yeah, so I'll take it first. So when you look at the security of these systems, they generally have, I believe there's some sort of accountability to the central bank when it comes to the security of financial transactions online. When it comes to the security of government online payment systems, the Trinidad and Tobago Cybersecurity Incident Response Team, we handle those assessments here. When it comes to, let's say there is an incident or a breach of information or a breach of card data, we'll be looking at the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service Cybercrime Unit and the Fraud Squad in the TTPS.
Okay, good. Any one of my panelists has anything else to add on this particular question?
Yeah, I just think I would just add to it that a part of it also is to kind of be smart where the links are coming from. One of the things that Raj kind of alluded to in terms of the user, a part of the process is the user is kind of the critical factor. No matter how much firewalls you put and VPNs, your most vulnerable in is the end user at the end of the day. So even if you are purchasing something online or anything like that, one of the things I always do is to double check back onto the original website. I just always do some amount of investigation. It doesn't have to be anything technical, just users, just being a user, just kind of just double checking the links. What Raj spoke about, there is electronic transactions legislation in Trinidad that protects those electronic transactions, and they are accountable. So I think just doing some due diligence as well helps. Oftentimes I get links to process payment, and before I put my credit card information in, I kind of double check the link. I'm not technical, I'm a policy person, but I try to make sure the link is coming from the authenticated site itself. So that's also a good way to think about it, just from the practical side.
Good advice.
A very nice way to actually check to see if your link is legitimate is try just Googling it. If you could find the link through Googling and going through the website, then you're pretty much in a better standpoint, than just clicking on the link of the email.
Also, George, one thing that I'm thinking of is one thing that could help is that maybe some of us, at least it's not something that I did in the past a lot, is to make us the habit of at least, I don't know, once a week, for example, to have a look at our expenses charged to our credit cards and our debit cards, because I use a lot of debit card every day, dozens or even more times a day, and small charges can be made, and a lot of money can be raised through stealing small charges. So it's a good thing or a good habit to take like half an hour once a week and have a look at my expenses and see if there's something that is not normal there, and just call the correct desk or bureau or office to raise my. Of course, the bank will be one of the first resources, but then there are from consumer protection bodies, etc. We can go and see. But if you don't know what's happening, you cannot take any action. So the first thing, I think, it's always to know what's going on and to know what I'm exposed to. No, because we also normally talk about cybersecurity and protecting the system. No, but the ultimate goal is to protect the people behind those systems, because I don't care if my phone crashes. I mean, it's going to be sad because I have to buy another one and it's expensive, but anyway, it's a phone. The problem is when the people it's impacted and how we are impacted by those threats. So we have to make sure we know what's going on you need to be able to act after that.
Okay. Thank you. I think it's coming back to that point of personal responsibility for those kinds of actions. Dev, is there any other question waiting for us to respond?
Yes, thank you, George. This is Devanand. So we have a question from Karishma Raghunath Singh. How feasible would it be to make it mandatory that organizations be associated or at least employ a cyber response team?
Floor, the question is open to the panel.
Just from the practical standpoint, because I'm among technicians, so it's always hard for me to speak when I have all these smart people with me. I'm just a policy person, but think about it more not in terms of a cyber response team, but to make sure that you have a cybersecurity response role within your organization. We always give those practical things to our member states because I think people think of team and then it automatically start thinking about a large budget. And then once people start thinking about the budget, they get intimidated and then they just scrap the idea altogether. So what we always suggest is start small and think about, do I have someone who is my information security person? The role is assigned either to your IT person or you hire somebody for that. But think about the role to make sure that somebody's actually checking your network. Someone is actually responsible for coordinating your policies. All your users within your organizations know who to call if they have an incident. And then once you kind of build up that experience within your organization, you can then start to make a case to your CEO, your manager that, hey, this role is substantive, I need a budget line. And when you get the budget line, you may be able to hire a person. So kind of think small, because I saw in the chat persons talk about SMEs, and that's always the issue. We think big, and we always think this incident response team needs to have fancy screens on the wall. They need to have a million technologies, but all they really need is an open source ticket system. Someone can call them, report an incident. Someone is accountable to follow what the issue was and have some resolve. So think about it more practically. That's just my take on it. The technical people on here, which are the smarter people, can probably give you a better idea. But we always try to think about roles rather than just having a team, because that's usually intimidating.
I would just want to add with what to what Carrie-Ann just said. If you do want to go all the way and have a budget and to set up a CIT, incident response team, there is the RFC 2350, which is probably the easiest RFC you will find and can read in English to make sense. You could actually use that to guide you how to set up your CIT and to actually come up with an initial budget and probably have a plan and to scale it as time goes. So look for that RFC 2350.
But Raj, is that for SMEs or small and medium, they probably don't even understand what an RFC is, and they probably it's way beyond their capability of thinking.
One of the things I said, George, is that is the simplest RFC you can find, easy to read. It's in English. I think Anish would support me on that. Right?
It's one of the easier ones, definitely.
The problem is I'm selling fried chicken and chips. That's not my forte. It's not my strength. I'm dependent on one person or 1.5 persons that I have in my employee that managing IT that has a million tasks to do at the end of the day. So I'm trying to get a feel for how do we elevate the importance of this subject for people whose core business is not IT and security. How do we get that message to them?
Sure. I think that to add to what Carrie-Ann said at the beginning, I would add to that we have I would say that we also have a cybersecurity role within our family now. I mean, this has changed again.
Yeah, agreed.
So we are our own cybersecurity team. In the past, we didn't care about cybersecurity. Maybe some of us care because it's part of our job, but not because on Sunday we will read about cybersecurity. Maybe I read a novel, but not about cybersecurity. So I would say take your time, or a little time at least, to know what is going on out there, to be able to act, because there's a common set there that says you don't have to I mean, sometimes it's better not to know how to solve something, but to have the number of the one that knows how to solve it. But to call that one person, you have to know what's going on. So I should say, okay, I should call this. So be informed, be informed. You are your own, we are on our own at certain level now, but you know.
Okay, good.
So just to add my take on it, particularly for smaller organizations, the C-suite is here if you need advice, if you need direction, you know, so feel free to reach out through our website or email, and, you know, we could more than help you, you know, dependent on resources, of course, you know, we're still a government entity, so resources are strapped. But, you know, we'll do our best to guide you in the right direction, and, you know, how much ever collaboration is needed, we could work with it from there.
So actually, my point of view is that that's where the responsibility and the accountability should really exist, because the government at the end of the day is the one that should be challenged and should be the one that has the budget to understand the importance of having this access for its citizens. We can't obviously all set up C-suites in our organizations, but there should be that central governing body. Devana, do we have any more questions on the web that we need to respond to?
There's another question from Luke. Sorry, Devanan here speaking. The question is, when we consider the future of digitalization in the Caribbean, what are the expectations of the IT fraternity in terms of CARICOM involvement? Are they a key stakeholder as a group in making things move faster?
I'm going to kick that conversation off because as some of you know who have been had other conversations or attended our other seminars, we've been speaking about something called the Caribbean Data Protection Act for the Caribbean, really modeled against the GDPR. And we've been trying to bring this, the best way to bring this up with the CARICOM governments. And just like everything else, it depends on where they see as priorities of getting important legislation like this enough. And for those of you who want more information on that, you know, please feel free to visit igf.tt to see the last discussion that we've had on this back in November, I think it was, where we had a major discussion on CDPR. But to be honest, we don't have the outlet to get it to the CARICOM, and more importantly, get that decision to be made at the highest level that this is important enough to make a decision on. I'll leave it open to anybody else who's on the panel to give their input on this.
I think that if you go back and look at the interministerial report to set up the cybersecurity agency for Trinidad and Tobago, one of the line items in that report speaks about when you set up your CSIRT, you're going to set it up in such a way that you're going to have collaboration lines with other CSIRTs, both locally, but more so regionally and internationally, because you're really on the internet, which is a global network. You cannot really protect yourself from incidents in isolation. You have to collaborate. And this is where I mentioned earlier in the discussion that the OS was involved in assisting with building that capacity with Trinidad and with academia, and building that network out regionally. They actually involve all the OS countries. So of course, you do that based on your own networking. I don't know if the question was more towards having a more formal CARICOM body for overseeing something like that. I know our Prime Minister sits on the CARICOM. He chairs, I think, the security committee there, cybersecurity committee. So it's something probably we need to take forward and see if one of these days we get the CSA, Trinidad and Tobago CSA set up soon. How do we have that collaboration, at least not just at the CSIRT, but the higher level, the government and higher levels at the national level in different areas of cybersecurity.
Okay, so I'll make a note that Raj has advertised that we send a WhatsApp to Dr. Rowley to make sure he gets this on his agenda. Somebody else had a comment?
Right. So when you look at cybersecurity at a CARICOM level, we do collaborate with some of the other CSIRTs in CARICOM. When it looks at policy, cybersecurity policy across CARICOM, that's handled usually by CARICOM Impacts. They have a cybersecurity group inside there that tries to coordinate at that level. In the case of our local CSIRT, how we get information to and from is actually through the OAS, through a network called CSIRT Americas, where we have a direct line to every CSIRT on this side of the hemisphere. So it's a very easy way for us to share information and receive information about threats and activity and the like.
Mm-hmm. Great.
George, also one comment on that is that there is also something that all governments may do, which is to for example, to publish or make it available to the public good practices. Not only to the domestic side, but to ISPs, for example, internet service providers and organizations. There are a lot of protocols that may be deployed that protect the users and the networks from different kind of threats or cyber attacks. That there's a lot yet to do in that field, and the one role of the government is to promote that, to invite all the organizations, all the internet service providers to deploy those protocols to be able to be more secure and protected.
Okay,
that's
great.
For a technical and a network perspective.
Good.
And just to wrap up that point, I think just to follow on from Nicholas and Anish's, one of the things we've been focused on at the OAS is capacity building. So for the rest of the year, we've been encouraging our CERTs to reach out to some of their constituents when we do have free open training, to at least not just members of the CERT, but other CERTs within the country that they work with to be part of the training, because a national network is only as strong as each of the network operators actually cooperate with each other. So having your ISPs as a part of the training, having your private sector, your public sector part of the training, so that when the CERT reaches out to them, it's not the CERT trying to build the capacity, but everyone is kind of on par with the knowledge that's needed for information sharing. So we even, just for everyone to know, we did something recently with the Pacific Alliance called MISP, which is one method of information sharing platforms. And we've been encouraging our member states to think about information sharing among the national CERT and other persons within the country to be able to share data, because it's not a matter of getting the data out in the region. If something is happening in Trinidad, more than likely it's probably happening up the pipeline in Jamaica. It's probably happening in Barbados. But because one, nobody's talking about it, everyone is being knocked off one by one, like a secret assassination happening that nobody's talking about. So if we start to share information, putting in the right protocols, because that's one of the things we actually developed for the Pacific Alliance, an information sharing protocol. So among the 4 countries in the alliance, they're able to use that protocol, common terminologies, common taxonomies for different incidents. So everyone says penetration is penetration. This kind of attack is an attack. So everyone is speaking the same language. If 5 pens mean that it's a serious incident, everyone hears it the same way and can share data. So it's something that we're thinking about for the Caribbean, and we're going to see how we can figure out to roll out that kind of training to make sure that Caribbean countries start to think about it the same way as well. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Excellent point, Carrie. Folks, we're pretty much near to what our end of time was. Dev, if you have any further questions, can we encourage our participants to probably send them, or we can follow up separately with specific things. But a lot of this comment and a lot of the presentations will be at the IGF.TT website. And if you have any further questions arising when you leave and you said, hey, I should have asked this question of this panel, please feel free to contact us at info@mag.tt. And I do encourage you to join the MAG so that you can be part of these discussions as we go forward. In the remaining time that we have left, I would like to have each panelist give a 1-minute overview on where you would really like to see this go next based on this discussion and all the points that have arisen in 1 minute or less. So I'll throw something at you if you take more than a minute. So Kerry, why don't we start with you?
I think I just want to encourage everyone on the call to think about cybersecurity not as an intimidating undertaking. Cyber hygiene is what we promote, and thinking about how you brush your teeth, comb your hair. Internet is now our new life. It's not something that is a distant future where we think it's something out of our reach. All our kids are online. We are online every day. Some of us are stuck at home online. So that's the only interaction. So I think I just wanted to leave with everyone to think of cybersecurity as a hygiene matter. Do your due diligence, update your machines, do your password changes, all the tips we've tried to give you here. Just try to employ it. I shared in the link Stop Think Connect website, because it's a very neutral platform that gives tips for every business, citizen, everyday person. So just wanted to leave with that.
Great. Anish?
Right. So what I want to leave you guys with is, to change how you think about cybersecurity a little bit. It's not just an IT responsibility. It's everyone in the organization has a part to play, and all you need to do, they're simple steps, to get yourself to improve your cybersecurity posture, right? As Kerry-Ann mentioned, keep your stuff up to date. Know your assets, know what you're protecting, know the information you need to be protecting, because not everything on your network needs to be protected to a Fort Knox level, so identify what you need to protect and prioritize. That's the best way you could use your resources, and contact the C-suite if you need advice, you need guidance. Reach out to us. We are here. You could reach out to us through our website, or our primary email address is contacts@ttcirt.gov.tt.
Great. Thank you so much, Anish. Nicholas?
Thanks, George. I think Kerry-Ann and Anish did a great summary of what the future and recommendations would look like. But what I may add to what they've said is that it's more or less the summary of what they say is that cybersecurity is part of our lives now, more than in the past, because great part of our social interactions and our life turned to almost fully online for a year now, and probably it's gonna take another year or so to go back to some degree of what we had before in terms of personal, face-to-face interaction. So this is part of our lives now, and we must act in consequence for that. And to add more, I want to tell you that we in ICANN we have one of our goals is to provide capacity building on all ICANN related topics, and we have a curricula. We have a lot of capacity building proposals to provide. We can also coordinate with Kerry-Ann. We are coordinating actually with Kerry-Ann, with Anish, with Raj, so we can all provide set up a capacity building schedule for any organization or group of users or anyone that wanting to go deeper into this matter. So I'm open to just drop me an email or contact George, and he will contact us, and we can coordinate and start right with that. So, and thanks very much for your time and for the invitation to this panel, George.
Thank you, Nicholas. Raj?
I think my colleagues said almost everything. I just posted a link on the chat to close things off. If you take a look at that particular document from Gartner, it will actually guide you in setting up a roadmap for the short term, the long term, medium term, right? And it's basically along the lines of what the entire discussion was about and how Kerry-Ann and Anish and Nicholas just summarized. But it'll actually give you a printed roadmap. You could sit down, read, digest, and of course, expect that to change as the situation changes. So just keep up to date with it and follow roadmaps. I saw someone also posted one from the UK government. So look out for those types of well-informed documents.
Great. Okay, great. Thank you, Raj. This brings us to the end of our panel discussion this morning, right on time at 12:45, which was our advertised time. It's impossible to cover a topic like this within 90 minutes. This could be a day or 2 or 3 days kind of discussion just to get everybody's input. So I do appreciate very much, first of all, our panelists who gave their time freely, gave their time this morning to, well, we had a couple of pre-meeting discussions, so thank you all for pre-discussions and this actually spending your time with us today. I'm sure the audience enjoyed what was presented. To you, our valued audience members, thank you so much for joining our conference today. And again, all the participation, all the questions that you have given us, you certainly have given us food for thought. And we will probably need to have a follow-up session or sessions on particular areas of what you guys have brought up with us. So thank you very much so much for your time. To the members of the IGF team, the TTMAG, thanks a lot for putting this together. And if you have any comments, anything that you'd want to give us advice on or need answers on, info@mag.tt is where you need to go. And I'd ask you to join the MAG. It's free membership, and you are really kept abreast of the things, the activities that are happening and how you can participate. With that, without much further ado, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day. Be safe out there, be healthy, and thank you.